Parvati Bhakti Hara Hara. Namah Parvati Bhakti Hara Hara. Hara 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 Hara. Hara 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 Hara. Namah Parvati Bhakti Hara Hara. Namah Parvati Bhakti
You talking about the lies of the machine on the machine that lies, and we're going to be talking about some religious topics here tonight, continuing our series on the historical setting of the Middle East, and the various problems and issues there. We're joined by a dear brother and friend here, uh, Father Joseph Swaden, who's going to be illuminating some of those, theories and differences where we're ignorant. Of course, we're going to be plugging in some of the knowledge from somebody who knows, instead of talking out of our ass, which is probably a lot better, but bless you guys for joining us here. And, we're going to run through some of the changes that happened during and before the advent of Islam, and then we'll be talking about the spread of Islam and how that took place. And some of the Christian groups were also involved in that spread at a beginning stage. Of course, you have the Arab Christians, and then you have the positions of the church. So it's all very interesting. Last time in the series, we had a controversial guest. And due to that fact, we lost most of our audience, most of our supporters, So I think you'll see quite a change in the amount of support we got from last time to this time. Last time there was ample panel, ample people in the chat. Today there's no one, so you see how ruthless the online communities could be, but we don't shirk from our task. Our task is to present controversial issues, right at the barriers and the rifts of religion and culture, right at the under the rift of the schism, if you will, so if there's any types of issues there, but I find that many people have a hard time grasping what the Trinity is. You know, um, you know.
Did you want to talk about the Trinity, or
Oh, yeah.
I could. Okay.
Of
Well,
course.
what it comes down to is that ultimately, in Orthodox Christianity, God is triune. And what that means is that we're talking about, they're not parts, they're persons. However, this is often interpreted to mean three gods, but they're kind of, you can't describe them as such because they're ultimately interdependent. For example, the Son of God is the Logos of God, or the Word of God, and the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of God. So you can't really have God without a spirit or without a word. And so now some people will say that kind of is breaking God down into parts. But in a sense, that's not what obviously Orthodox Christians believe was revealed. The concept of, how shall I put this, isolated monotheism does exist in a few different religions before the coming of the church. But the point is that what was revealed to us is that God is three persons, and that's the way we would see that. So it's in one God.
What about this term? Because this term is fascinating to me. This term homoousia. If you could break down this term, because it says that God is of the same essence.
Mm-hmm.
And the term they apply for this is homoousia. So three persons, one essence.
Mm-hmm.
As the classical view of the Trinity, as I come to understand it, and I see you agreeing there. So I think it goes to this term homoousia. I think you could break down this term.
That means the same essence, effectively. But that's true. God the Son is, and God the Spirit is, of the same essence as the Father. And what this was really tending to indicate was ultimately that they were of a similar nature. remember that when the term was created, it was in response to Arius, who was arguing that the
Right.
Son was in fact a created being. And so to emphasize the fact that he was not a created being, but that he was God, that's where that term eventually developed. So that's kind of, that was an anti-Arianizing statement. Now, it's important to remember that even after the Council of Nicaea, because one thing to keep in mind is that we're going to be unpacking this history here, but at the Council of Nicaea, there were Arians that were being judged, but afterwards, the Arians still existed and continued to
Right.
spread to other areas. When the Goths took over, they were Arian.
Right.
And so the point is that the church's work wasn't finished until Arianism was finished. And then some would argue that even the 20th century has brought us a whole bunch of interesting things into reality, such as the mass return of Arianism through the Jehovah's Witnesses. And then, Jehovah's Witnesses splitting, where there's now liturgical Arians who want nothing to do with the Jehovah's Witnesses because they were Russellites, etc. So we're watching like the rebirth of every heresy the church has ever fought in the past 2,000 years coming back. And so this is, that's not a surprise, but I think a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, we want to keep in mind how the kind of historical perspective in each case. Because when Arianism was defeated at the Council of Nicaea,
Exactly.
it was by no means defeated in reality.
Yes.
They were still around. They were just condemned, and they were persecuted by the state. And then ultimately they evangelized other areas. So it's important to keep in mind that what looks like something that was long defeated not only often continued to survive for many more centuries, but actually would even make comebacks. We mentioned before the stream Manichaeism. And Manichaeism is making a comeback now, and this is largely due to the discovery of old documents.
The Gnostic Gospels and all of that stuff, and also thinkers like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, who seems to promote writings like that. Yeah.
Well, the big problem, I think, is that there's always the desire to go after the esoteric, to chase after the strangest thing.
Oh my! yes, we're well aware of it today.
And I am an advocate of boredom. I am an advocate of the plain, the clear, the standard. I am like, because I am so conformist, I am now a radical.
Well, who really knows, the original back and forth are the occultists, to many degrees. Like, in order to, build off of what they've made, they have to actually memorize the real form in order to trick people about it. Yeah. So you'll often see that some of these occultist people, unfortunately, they know the scriptures more than some of the believers, and they're able to trick people now because you have tools such as the internet and all that type of stuff. They're able to point to scripture and stuff, and then totally anathematize these beliefs and trick people. There's also that going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to some degree, I hate to say this, but the beauty of the time of the internet and the beauty of the period in which we live is that there's a wealth of information that can be found about everything. Yes. And I mean, I hate to say this, but as a kid, I grew up around libraries. I was taught as a kid to, go to the library. I was always there. And so I had, the basic concepts of the Dewey Decimal System and categorization going, but I'm going to be honest, for every one me, there were 150 kids who'd never set foot in the library. So what we're seeing now is we are seeing a rise of, for lack of a better term, information brokers in a world of information broke people, where basically a lot of people are just there for the cat pictures. And I hate to say this, but you're going to find that in every religious group, whether it's Christian, whether it's Muslim, etc. It's the people, they do what their parents say, but then they never open anything again. They just go their way. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. These people have no concept of any of it because they weren't paying attention and they weren't taught to categorize. So yeah, I think that this is going to be an interesting debate because when you look at the big historical picture, a lot of interesting things can be discovered.
Yes, and I think you'll like my book for that reason because I mean, and I had Adam Green on here too. I'll send him my book. Um, I'll send him a version too, so I'll get an atheist view, and I'll get your view as a Christian. So that'll be interesting.
I'd love to do a review of your book if you send it to me.
Of
I'll gladly
course,
do that. Yeah.
of course, of course. I would be humbled, at this rate, to actually have a Christian thinker, take a good look at the book and see what they think, because it is a strange sort of theory, and my goal was to present it to my a great Christian friend who died on Christmas Eve,
Sorry to
almost
hear
two
it.
years ago, but he was a great thinker and stuff, and I was going to present some of these arguments to him, and see what it where it went, and actually we were going to start that show together. Holy robots, about religion and technology, and that's kind of where my show is at today. My show takes a critical look at technology and philosophy and science. Kind of this trifecta of evil, I want to call it. You know what I mean? Sort of hijacking the minds of people and sort of usurping the traditions of the world. And I think no matter what background you come from, if you're Hindu, Christian, Muslim, I mean, you could see the negative effects that technology has had on all sorts of values and traditions,
Mhm.
throughout the ages, and that's why you see a resurgence of all of these sort of demonic modes of worship, that focus literally on demons, like Gnosticism, saying that they're holy and type of stuff, and this type of antinomian. I read, to the audience, the Gospel of Judas,
Mhm.
real horror show stuff. The Gospel of Judas. It's not for the kids and the family, to read. And you could see the type of people that were preaching this type of stuff. I mean, you can only kind of imagine, how they would treat each other and all this type of stuff, and people having revelations left and right. I'm sure, and just like Saint Irenaeus said. So I could see his, sort of disapproval that some lady just stood up and said she was like, woken up by the Holy Spirit, and she came up with her own prophecy. And he's like,
Yeah, imagine how you feel about Pentecostals now.
right. Like I can only
Probably,
imagine what he thought,
yeah.
and eh, eh, so
Well, one thing that
that,
we do want to keep in mind is that, like, if you're looking through, like, Eusebius's ecclesiastical history, for example, where he talks about, like, persecution of different groups and the woman who eats her baby. I mean, it's even though these things are horrifying in history, what it does teach us is that the current age we live in is bad in many ways, but is it the worst? Can it get worse? It absolutely can get worse.
right.
We have to take the positives with it and work with that because in the end, we're not meant. Earth isn't our ultimate destination anyway.
Right, and that's what I was telling people, that at the time of Jesus, there was all of these sects and groups and clubs, and there was elite Jews who ran the Roman society, for lack of a better term. There were, here's people complaining that, small hats are running everything. It's like they were making the same complaints back then. They had the same conspiracies back then. You know what I mean? So I mean, these are nothing new. It's the same thing for 2,000 years. And nothing's changed. So,
Well, I mean,
really,
I think things to some degree have changed, and I would say that the fundamental change ultimately comes with the coming of Christ. When we look at
yes,
because if we look at the Old Testament and we see, what we sometimes refer to as the Jews today, they were, by and large, a people who were really not very good at, I hate to say this, but following God's rules. They were disobedient constantly. and they received retribution from God for that. But the point is that the prophecies that had already existed of the coming of the Messiah had to be fulfilled for the sake of humanity. And so ultimately, everything went to pass as it would in the time of Christ. The temple's end was predicted because there was now the new temple in terms of the church, and that would spread throughout the world. So this is kind of, so yeah, all of human history is transformed by the cross. It is, granted, the world is still twisted and evil, but the template to having a fighting chance for salvation on earth expands to the world. And so that's kind of an amazing thing. But then ultimately it leads to the conflicts that we're talking about, and that continued on all the way to the present day.
Yeah, and that's kind of what my book was about. Was about this pivotal figure. That even if you reject all of history, I'm kind of, the first part of my book is like, even if you took a total mythicist position, then even then the birth of Christ, or however this plays out, the seminal figure of just Christ, is the central figure of our history today. So I think that just the explosion of world culture at the time of after the time of Jesus, and exactly anticipated by the work of the Gospels, that basically says, as I said, it anticipates a world culture. And it not only says that, it doesn't say that this world culture that's going to emerge is going to be a good thing. Even it says, look, something's going to happen in the name of Jesus after Jesus is gone, and it's going to be monumental, and it's going to shake up the world, and it's going to be culminating in the return of the Christ, in a way, because it's going to come to pass that all of these things that create this world culture are going to become usurped because of its, mimicking of what Christ represents. And that's why I called my book Christ Protagonist, or Logos Dethroned, talking about this type of shift in world history, that there's this shift in terms of, not only in terms of Christ being a seminal figure in history, but also this concept of the Logos, of ontological transcendence, and that being brought down to earth. And that's what I think modernism is, is like this usurpation of, what is, just truth that is beyond this world, and just bringing it down to earth and saying, no, we can recreate this world. We could, I guess the push of technology, the push of scientific hubris, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope to. I would hope I could maybe disabuse you of that notion of the idea that Christ could ever truly be dethroned. But I can see where one would make that argument. However,
it's more of just it's not exactly Christ, because as a Muslim, I can't personally say that Christ will be dethroned, because
right.
Because to us, Christ is the King and the Messiah that comes at the end.
Well, you said Logos, and I was thinking the Logos is
the
Christ.
Logos, the Logos, and that's the concept, because this word is fluid, because it's Heraclitus, and that's what I mean. They're trying to turn it back into Heraclitus, and that was my thing about it, is that they're gonna take this word and transform it, and it doesn't really have to do with the Logos per se, but the truth. The truth. Saying the truth is, in my opinion, objective. So it exists outside of us. One of my favorite thinkers of all time, and I'd love to talk to you about this. My Christian friend who died. He he died on Christmas Eve, and he sent me a copy of a book that he bought on Amazon. Two copies, one for him and one for me. And the book is called Kierkegaard, Philosopher of the Heart. And man, I have such an attachment to Kierkegaard, and I think that that whole thing with Kierkegaard about the truth being made objective, how he rails against like Kant and Hegel for that. I think that is a real nugget of wisdom there, in terms of religious practice. And I made my baby brother recently read the book Fear and Trembling. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
No, I haven't. I'm not too familiar with Kierkegaard, but I mean, I have like a very basic view.
Excellent book, and I know he's Protestant, so but
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm not going to judge him for that. It's just that I'm kind of not a like when it comes a lot of the stuff that's talked about on YouTube, especially. Is like philosophy, and you have to recognize Kierkegaard's contribution to philosophy, etc. Regardless, but I've never been much of a philosophy guy. Now, you did.
My obsession is philosophy.
Yeah, a lot of people apparently on YouTube share that obsession. So, but what I was.
And I hate it. That's my only. That's how I'm different. Is I tell them philosophy has ruined their religion for them. So yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the way the church, the Orthodox Church has put it is that Christ is the true philosophy. Ultimately, is that if a man is a lover of wisdom, he will come to Christ. And so that's kind of where, it's the ultimate wisdom. And which is funny because one of the things I was looking at what we were originally going to talk about, and one of the things was Boethius, or Boethius. I'm not sure how exactly it's pronounced, but that led me to listening to 9th century pop music, or popular music, I should say. But in any case, so it's kind of been I understand how it can sometimes look daunting. Especially once you see, for example, like you mentioned, modernism, which we consider a condemned heresy. But the point is that once you see the modernists, the transhumanists at work, you realize, this is no different than alchemy. This is no different than another attempt to build a golden calf. It's all. I hate to use the meme, but it's all so tiresome. Once you see them for what they are, this isn't gonna work. It didn't work for humanity ever before. It's just rearranged in different ways. Now we have a lot more science fiction involved. It gets me thinking about what's the name of the little bald guy from the WEF? He's not Schwab, but Noah Harari. This dude has written these massive tomes, these books. Where basically he's implying that we are going to defeat the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and become immortal through digitization.
And he also argues that Christ is a historical fiction, so why would he be worried about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?
Well, I mean, there's a real reason for this, and I mean, I don't think we're allowed to say it. But the point is,
right, yeah, right.
But yeah. So the whole point is, they're gonna try again to say, blah blah, God is dead, Jesus isn't real. This is stuff they've been saying for so long that it's almost a predictable script once you see it, and that's why I'm not too worried about it. As long as you're aware, because once you're aware of it, it's like when somebody's pointing a gun at you from a distance. Once you're aware of it, you can run. But if you're not aware of it, then you're in trouble. And this is, again, it falls back to the whole low information people that are scrolling through the cat pictures. There's an immense opportunity to learn, and a lot of people just don't bother.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to bring people to a new kind of seeing these pitfalls of what can be used in the religion, against the people who follow the religion, because there are several pitfalls, and in terms of one of the things that's being mischaracterized today is philosophy. They say they try to mix philosophy with theology and try to get the better better end. You'll see religious values collapse into universal values.
Right. Yeah.
You'll see Christianity collapse into Judeo-Christian, even sometimes Abrahamic.
Well, even the term Judeo-Christian is only about 90 years old. It's all modernism,
Exactly,
every
exactly.
bit of it. And
Yeah,
ultimately, I hate to say this, but what they're trying to do is the exact same thing as the people who built the Tower of Babel. They're
right.
trying to build their superstructure to challenge God, and it never works. This is just a different form of it, and they're doing it now. They're talking about digital immortality and transhumanism. This is just, once you take out and you peel back the layers of, the mythos that they're trying to create, you realize that, they just really want all of our land, all of our stuff. They want to have a small slave class, and they want to wipe off like 90% of the planet. Okay, that's psychopathic, and they should probably be, held, in trial indefinitely, etc., or put to death or something. But unfortunately, they still have a lot more money than we do. So all we can do at this point is avoid things that make us die, while we try to figure out how to deal with the people who are really trying to hurt us.
Yes, and Christ tells the Pharisees. He says to them, you guys don't know where you came from, and you don't know where you're going, but I know where I came from, and I know where I'm headed to. So you guys don't have to tell me. And that's the thing is seeing how we got into this struggle, and a lot of it is history, and it goes to the ways people understand the history of the Middle East. We're in this present conflict, and it just seems like people want to collapse these terms, into these broader understandings, and you'll see, I guess the top ones would be Christianity collapsed into Judeo-Christian, collapsed into universal values, collapsed into Western, and
Mm-hmm.
also collapsed into sometimes even European or Jewish, just in general, or something like that. But if you see the actual history of the church, you see a group that's trying to preserve a continuous doctrine. And as we stated, we described this Trinity,
Yeah.
and the term homoousia, and how it's neither. And if you guys look at my past shows, Origin of Mythicism, of Gnosticism and Perennialism, I describe modalism and tritheism, and how those fall short of being the exact Trinity. There,
It's an uncomfortable balance, but the idea is
right?
that we're expressing a mystery.
Yeah,
Now, it's interesting. That's what I remember what I wanted to mention. The mythicism thing. I was watching an argument from Myth Vision, Derek, like this thing about like where he's talking about like
garbage.
all the different levels of mythos and different kinds of mythos that go into it. And once you know about it, you can read the gospel that way. The problem is this. The writers of the gospel didn't know all this stuff. They were not like
Exactly.
experts in, mythos from around the world. So either A, Christ is truly, in fact, like this ultra Promethean figure who has all of these characteristics from all of these different myths by accident, or it's just like it's a ridiculous position to take.
Right. Could you imagine the super magi who traveled all these lands? So got Osiris and
the
Krishna,
star of Osiris is moved
and put them all in a fucking, put them all in
that
one
way, and it's just it becomes ridiculous the level of education that you have to maintain. That you have to assume on the part of the people in the scriptures to maintain a mythicist view. Effectively, everybody's an overeducated liar. And so it's just, yeah, it's not it's it sounds good when you hear it, and for a low info person, it works. But once you know enough about it, you realize these aren't really tenable positions.
Yeah, I look at
It's like the climate change stuff. Like
right.
actual scientists who study that, they're like, this doesn't make sense. There's issues with these models, and when they point them out, they're shouted down because stupidity makes it all the way up to the scientific, heights. You get up there, and there's low info people who got their degrees sleeping through class and believed all the myths, evolution being a myth. That's a huge one. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, of course we descended from lizards." I mean, sure, why not? It's it starts to you start to realize that people get indoctrinated with garbage early, and they're trying very hard, but I don't think they're succeeding. Um, I think that they're definitely they've had a lot of success in the West, but unfortunately, societies do rise and decline, and I hate to say it, but maybe the West is going to need to decline before it picks up and realizes what it lost. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that process, but certainly we're not at the end of it.
Yes, and that's another thing I look at in my book is these myths, like I'm like Elaine Pagels. One of the most famous ones is Elaine Pagels, who wrote this work called the Gnostic Gospels, and she's
Okay.
paraded around on these shows like Myth Vision all the time.
Oh,
And
okay.
and the types of things she says, she takes very liberal takes. You can tell in her book where she's saying like the Gnostics were like feminists because they had
Oh, yeah.
female followers. It's like this is retarded. Like it's like the thing is that the Gnostics believed like in such a harsh dichotomy between male and feminine energy, that they must have in a way, they think that you should combine the two sexualities. I mean, they were in by no sense feminists. Is what I'm trying to say. It's just like kind of
Well,
stupidity beyond.
you see, it depends. And again, this is where we have to strip back the layer. And what I mean by that is when we strip back what we consider to be the positives of feminism, and we look at it
Right.
for what it at its base is. Effectively, it is licentiousness for women. It is freedom from children, which means depopulation.
And that's
And
what I
it
mean.
ultimately,
Ironically, it's true, but it works totally against her. It's like,
right,
wow,
but
okay.
the grand joke of it is that if you look at groups like in the Gnostics or like the Nicolaitans, etc., ultimately men, getting, for lack of a better word, cucked, and women being used in disgusting and horrible ways, it sounds exactly like the era that feminism is creating. So in a sense, they really are kind of close to these groups because those groups were crazy, except we have the value of hindsight to say, oh, that's gross. But we don't realize we're doing it right in front of us through modern methods like feminism.
Yes, and the other recommendations she gives about like she's telling people not to follow Christianity and basically follow Gnosticism. It's basically like what the theme of this book is,
Yeah.
and then
Who's Gnosticism? Yeah,
because
that's
it's
the
like
point.
so much more like understanding, like and anybody who reads this book and understands like what she's saying, this is what this woman is saying,
Mm-hmm.
and then she's like comparing Christianity to like Buddhism and stuff, so that like Buddhism looks like nice by comparison. So I just point out in my book, like, look at how she's doing this, guys. Like she belongs to a organization that who their goal is. And I'm talking about the Lindensfarne Association. One of their goals is the planetization of the esoteric. It's like
Oh,
what is
okay.
that even? What the what? It's like
What does that
so.
mean? Yeah,
Yeah,
it means spread the gospel of what's the word I'm looking for? Occultism. Anyway,
yeah,
the
exactly.
point is, that's all it is. It's just
And I'm like,
repackaging it in a brand new way.
I'm like,
It's marketing.
you're part of an organization whose mission statement is such as this, and we're supposed to think that your views on religion are completely objective.
Oh
That's it's like it's like this is the type of stuff, and she's brought on these shows like Myth Vision as this great expert on Gnosticism. this lady's takes are completely biased. Doctor, she's some academic,
Mhm.
that was literally chosen as a gatekeeper for these views, and I can't believe it, but
Well,
yeah,
that's what part of it is. Again, you have to remember that when we're dealing with, I don't know if you've ever read Father Seraphim Rose's Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future.
no,
If
I'm still
not,
getting around to that one. Yeah.
I highly recommend it because keep in mind the stuff he wrote about was in the 1970s. He died in 1982. But he was talking about everything from all of the occult Gnosticism coming up, the charismatic movements, transhumanism in the 70s. Like, if you read this book, you'd think it was being written about right now, and then you realize he wrote it 45 years ago, 50 years ago. But the point is, the reason why is because once you start looking at all the parts, the plan becomes much more obvious. And so
Yes, and
ultimately, this is in some ways the script is kind of predictable. Um,
if you look at a book like Jacques Ellul, Technological Society, he talked about these things in the 60s. So it's
wow.
crazy. Like he actually started, because he said, well, they're going to have, these subgenres and these countercultures and these countercultural movements, and they're going to, make all these fads and stuff. It's going to be the age of fast culture and
Hmm.
all this type of stuff. And, through the use of mass media propaganda, and mass communication technologies,
I'm
and
gonna
some, yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah.
see I'm gonna one up you there. Aldous Huxley, and this is I'm gonna tie the whole thing together
Oh,
because I
Huxley,
think we
yeah.
can't.
I'll tell you right now. Huxley recommended Elul's book.
Yeah, and Huxley,
Yeah,
the author of Brave New World, few people realize it, but if you look at his life, he was related to some of these
Darwin.
globalist
Oh yeah,
leaders of his
yeah,
of
yeah.
his
We talked
time.
about it. Yeah, we
And
talked
so,
about it. Yeah,
and
Darwin.
so,
Yeah,
yep. And
yeah,
so the
yeah.
whole
You'd be
point,
surprised what we've covered on this show.
yeah, I wouldn't, I know, but what ultimately it comes down to is that these people are doing what I would call scripting. I don't think that was the case
Exactly.
I don't think it was the case in Father Seraphim's time. Maybe he was trying to do it as a warning, but the point is, when we begin to commit to paper and we begin to commit to mass media, the message that we want to send, it has a kind of an outward wave. And what that means is that the people who controlled, remember, up until very recently, all your news and all your information came from a few select television channels owned by the same people, a few select radio stations owned by the same people. Even now, they're trying to centralize it again, and they're finding it's really hard to do because the cat's out of the bag. But these people were able to project what they wanted to be the future, and effectively manifesting it. But what's happening now is that more and more discordant voices are coming up and are not in favor of the crazed plans that these people have. I mean, keep in mind that just 25 years ago, on the age of, around the age of the beginning of the internet, most people did believe in some sort of global warming or global cooling, largely because of the fact that they had been convinced of it by media organizations, not by legitimate science. So yeah, I think that we're in an interesting time because I think the powers that be are getting a pushback, and it's going to become larger and larger.
Yes, and this is a an issue that I'd really, really like to go in with you on. Is Because it is the main topic of this show. We have dozens of materials on the show relating to the philosophy of technology.
Hmm.
That's kind of like the main topic of interest here, especially philosophy of mind and philosophy of science, how those things relate to I guess the use of technology, how we use technology. And one of the guys that comes up quite a lot is Aristotle. Aristotle is like what, like the demon of this show, is Aristotle, really, because I guess first and foremost because he invented the word technology, called techne logos.
Hmm.
And that's partly what I mean by logos dethroned is that logos has been inframed within techne, so it's been, kind of corralled and usurped in that way, and that's that's very too much metaphysical for people to grasp at this rate. But yeah, I would love to have you on to talk about technique and about especially there's a way that it relates to ritual.
Hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
Yes, because ritual is, in a sense, it's a formula, but you can't get caught up in the formula of it, or else it's lost. It's kind of like this very Confucian, like middle ground between like being, having sincerity and also performing the ritual correctly, and it's this delicate balance between the two.
No,
But
absolutely.
yeah, and that goes back to the church because I love how you guys have this, you know, man, just
We know
very beautiful
ritual.
beautiful, beautiful, expression of, how you guys hold your services. I do have to say that, but
Well, yeah, and with everything, there's always purpose. And this is one of the things that a lot of people, I guess, that it gets lost on people. People see the beauty, but they don't realize that there is a real purpose to it. But it all goes back to the fall of the temple and the church replacing the temple ultimately, because what you're seeing is temple worship. And so ultimately, it's, this is what people don't realize is that when they often talk about, like, Judaism, they tend to think of it as a continuation of the Old Testament. This is incorrect. The Old Testament church, or the Jews of the true Jews, I should say, ultimately became the Christians because even at that time, when Christ is speaking to the Pharisees, few people realize the Pharisees were actually a heretical sect. That the worship was done in the temple, whereas the Pharisees were saying, no one needs to go to the temple. You can worship in your homes. And so synagogues really were kind of like, they didn't have the importance that they did
they
to a
were
Jew of
debate.
Christ.
They were debate clubs. Is
Yeah.
what they said.
Ultimately, yeah, and Saint Paul actually weaponizes that in Acts when he realizes that they want to kill him, and he manages to get them to turn against each other so he can leave. But the point is that in the end, so we're preserving that ancient worship that goes all the way back to the beginning of mankind is the idea. And so it has, thankfully, certain things like, sacrificing animals is gone, but their removal isn't exactly the point. The removal is that Christ rescues us from our sins. So that's kind of the why there. So we take it serious.
Yeah, and we could sit here and do the regular thing, and I can sit and you can say, the Prophet Muhammad is this, that, and the third thing, and I could say Saint Paul is this, that, and the third thing,
Yeah.
but we're not gonna do that. We're actually gonna learn about each other's faith, so that we could figure out what these differences are and how this goes. But
Yeah, and I mean,
yeah,
I'm learning all the time. I don't think that you can really have. I don't think you can really have a real discussion if you don't understand people's authentic positions. And so even in discussing things like Islam, you could just go straight to, like, say like David Wood, etc. And that sounds like, okay, well, that sounds really good. But then you discover that a lot of Muslims don't really believe that. And that there's also lots of different kinds of Muslims in every different country, many of whom actually have, juridical proceedings against some of the things that are discussed. So it's never as simple as here it is, and because otherwise it just goes down to name calling. But definitely, I think we should talk about the concepts. They matter, obviously, and that's why we take them seriously. Now, I see you have Nestorianism up on the screen.
yes, and that is a little bit after 325 when they made
Right.
the
This is about
Athanasius.
150 years later.
Yeah, okay. So 150 years later, after they made the Athanasius Creed, they kind of had another kind of interesting idea about the Trinity,
Mhm.
where Christ had a dual nature. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
The dual nature of Christ as both man and God.
Now, here's one thing to keep in mind, that the historical understanding of the church, the way we see it is that it's never changed. And so what that means is, ultimately, when we had to define concepts like the homoousion, these were in response to people who got it wrong. And so, like Nestorius, in this case, that may well have started innocently. I don't think it did, because of the way Nestorius presented it. Okay, you're kind of rolling there, TML. I don't know if you're still there. But I can wait. I'm patient. Just no worries. Hopefully, it's just a quick internet thing that'll go away. Okay. Well, let's see here. But yeah. So as I was saying, Nestorianism ultimately is a rejection of the idea that Christ was God. In the same way that Arianism was a rejection that Christ was God, but it was it was presented in a different way. And what that was referring to was the fact that okay, it's just me now. Okay, hopefully he's back in a moment. Maybe he just stepped out to go back in because there was an issue. So let's be patient. We are live on the air. And let's see here. So I'm just thinking, normally this doesn't happen, so I'll just relax. So let me see here, and let's take a look at the comments. Okay. Thoughts on Archbishop Fulton Sheen? Gifted orator, interesting person. Very interesting historical figure. No worries. I was a little worried there. I was like, we're going to have to host
totally
this show.
fell out of there. Yeah, right. When I asked you the question, I totally fell out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. What I was saying is that in the same way that Arianism was a denial of Christ's divinity, Nestorianism was another form of denial which came in a different way. And what we learn is that ultimately, when we would always refer to the Theotokos, Mary. We didn't have the word Theotokos then, though. We just referred to Mary as the birth giver of God. And it was Nestorius and his followers who basically held, no, God could not be born of a woman. And this is a question about the transcendence of God. And so ultimately they say you can't call her Theotokos, you can only call her Christotokos, only bearer of Christ. But this effectively separates Christ into the divine and the human. So that's where the problem of nature comes up. So yeah, it's definitely worth discussing.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, they had a different view of the Immaculate Conception?
You mean are you referring to, you're talking about the conception of Christ, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of people get that, because Immaculate Conception can mean the conception of Christ, but Roman Catholics mean it's actually the conception of Mary, which we don't.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, no, we believe that Christ was, he was God and man. So he had to have been clean in the womb, because every man is by nature sinful. So the whole point is, but now the question of whether it was at his conception, it would be at his conception, but the whole point is, when was Mary cleansed? And so we would say that would be when she said, be it done according to the will of God, to the angel. In any case, yeah, so that's really what it comes down to. So yeah, we believe in God and man, and Christ he's one person with two natures. And this would eventually lead to the next problem, which was monophysitism, because people would be like, well, if it's one person, what about the divine human nature? Yeah. Exactly. And so, and this is where we see the schism of the Monophysites. And so you have the Nestorians on the one hand claiming that, God is basically two persons in one. You have the Monophysites claiming that God is just one person, some sort of fused human divine nature. The problem is that creator and creation can't coexist in the same space except
Mm.
through something miraculous, something mysterious, which is what we refer to as the hypostatic union. Because ultimately, then, if you have it one way or the other, either the human destroys the divine or the divine destroys the human. They can't exist unless it's meant to be that way. And the only way to describe that is, again, through the united nature of Christ. But it is two natures, one person. And this turned into quite I'll tell you, fun fact of history. If you were an historian in the 6th century, you probably thought your church was in charge of the world. They had missions going all the way to China. And, throughout a bunch of the world was convinced that they were, they were an historian, and they were like, we're the church. So what you think might look like the church now is not what it's going to look like in 1400 years. As it stands, Nestorians are now basically just a tiny faction in Iraq, with a few churches outside of it. But that's not how it was in the 6th century, for example. They were happy as can be, and they were not the Orthodox. So yeah, times do change, and everything's kind of a cycle of stuff.
Yeah, and that was the crazy part in the I'm in the resident sleeper debate. When you were talking about the marriage between Orthodox and Monophysites.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I was like, man, this guy's really hardcore.
I see you watched the debate.
Yeah.
I was just, believe it or not, a lot of what seemed to be like, and I've said this a lot because a lot of people watching that thought I was like really angry. I didn't know what to expect.
I didn't think that.
So I came in in the most prepared, the most potentially aggressive. I was waiting for Bloodsport. So that's that was my thinking, that it was going to be thrown on me. So I was like, okay, well, I better be ready.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had a bloodbath of a debate. I'm with Andrew Wilson one day where I took the pro Ted Kaczynski position. so I argued the most unpopular position in the world on the Crucible. I think
what was your position?
Pro Kaczynski.
Okay. I'll tell you, it's funny because it is ironic. It is the ultimate irony when you think about it, that in the very age of information we live in, a whole lot more people really like Ted Kaczynski. Like, people are like, he's like huge now. They call him Uncle Ted. He's a meme. I mean, it's like people have realized that, shoot, even in this post-internet age, an age that he definitely couldn't even envision in the 1970s, etc., when he started, that in this digital world, suddenly people were writing him emails like they were his biggest fan, not realizing the irony of the thing. But I think, at the end of his life, he grew to kind of embrace that he had a huge fan club, and it grows because there needs to be a balance between technology and, people. There needs to be a balance between people.
and then I also debated the resident sleeper. I'll send you that debate.
Okay. Yeah, I'll watch that.
Yeah, it's still out there. We debated the fall of man, and that's when him and Jim Bob, who I call Doodle Bob, because he refused to debate me, but yeah, they both said that Islam was Gnosticism, and I thought, oh my God, that is just such a weak argument. I had no way of, even, beginning to counter that without even seeming ridiculous. But yeah, this situation. Does this have to do with the Council of Chalcedon?
Yes.
Okay.
Ultimately, that was what it was resolved at the Council at Chalcedon. So,
yeah, and you see, I hesitated before I said that because I'm too dumb. but yeah, I got it correct. Yeah, Council of Chalcedon is addressing this one issue, is it not?
Mm-hmm. Directly. The council was in 451.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so that definitely that was the moment. That was kind of the moment that they literally had to condemn the teachings of Nestorius, um, and that ultimately led to kind of the origins of both the ancient Church of the East and the Coptic Monophysite Church, etc. These were, they came from this moment in history, so it's kind of a unique kind of way of looking at things. But yeah, so you had the Gnostics in the first few centuries, because keep in mind that the Gnostics have a bunch of different groups in the first centuries, which Irenaeus points out. You then have the Manichees, who kind of bring back some would argue that they were at the beginning, but they were related to the Mandaeans, and many of them were just bringing back this old Gnostic demiurge concept, which some could argue is pre-Christian. But the point is, so you had these groups as well that still existed. The church fathers talk about these people fairly regularly, like their size, why they're crazy, etc. But the point is, so by now you have the Gnostics that are kind of in decline because of the fact that they've kind of been shrinking a lot. The Manichees are kind of at their apex around this time. I shouldn't say that, because then they spread out to China as well. So yeah, the point is, there's a whole bunch of different groupings, and then on top of that, within the church, you now have first the Arians, who split from the church, then you have the Nestorians, and at the same time the Monophysites. So yeah, it's crazy time in the 450s, the 5th century, right about now. And the empire is trying to put their foot down. The empire, of course, as you know, is starting to fall apart at the seams, because you have the East Romans and the West Romans, and so you know where I'm going with this. This is some complicated stuff.
Oh yeah, this goes right to the 5th century. And we're going fast here because that's just how it goes. History moves fast, guys. And it's just, but the thing is that we can't talk about this for like 20 more shows, so we'll just have to move forward here.
We can,
yeah, because I want to present an entire history of the Middle East, in this series. But in this whole thing, then we have, in the 5th century, some huge changes in the church. So if you guys are getting, the cycle of what we've been discussing, first century, even before the 1st century, you have the Hasmoneans, and then you have, the Alexandrian Jews, and then you have the whole thing with Philo of Alexandria and these kind of crazy figures. Then you have Paul coming on the scene. Then you have the battles between Irenaeus and the Gnostics and all that stuff in the 2nd century stuff. Then you have
it's worth noting that Paul, and this is one thing that we have to kind of establish, that even though the church did deal with heretics and schisms, etc., the church was fundamentally the church. So Saint Irenaeus never disagreed with Saint Paul or anything like that. He considered himself a successor of Saint Paul.
But some of the Gnostic groups considered themselves successors of Saint Paul too. That's why he was battling against some of them, like the Valentinians. Mm-hmm. And I know that's some of his. I actually remember reading that that Irenaeus went to school with some people who went then and became Valentinians, and he wrote about it, and said, these guys were just, my Christian brothers like a day ago, and now they've fallen into this heresy,
Well, heresies were often, and especially with some Gnostic groups or some, more perverse occult groups, they were tempting. Ultimately Christianity it's about self-sacrifice. We're following a crucified Lord. But the whole point is that a lot of people, and even like today, when we look at like occult groups we talk about now, the lure of secret knowledge or the lure of something, it can't just be as simple as pray, fast, and suffer. There's got to be something deeper, something hidden, and that's always what gets people. There's like a magic. Like, you remember, I don't know how old you are, but I'm sure that you're old enough to remember like cheat codes in video games. These people were tempted by cheat codes at life, is what it comes down to.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what a lot of that Neoplatonism stuff. You see a lot of that stuff being used in Freemasonry, like by like
Hmm.
Manly P. Hall and stuff. Like he'll talk about the hierarchy of the soul and the hierarchy of being and all of these types of things.
Hmm.
They'll plug it in. And that's another reason why I go back to Aristotle so much is because they take kind of I'm trying to move the Platonic into the Aristotelian. That's one of the tricks. And I see that the church even realized this trick. During the 11th century, where they did these huge attacks on Averroism, and the spreading, that actually came from the Islamic world, and then spreading all the way to Christianity and into the Judaism of the time. But of course, as we see, Judaism was already corrupted around the first century. That's one thing I try to present to people is that about the Pharisees and the various sects of Judaism that actually existed along the lines of when Christ first started preaching. He was aware of these sects. So there's already sectarianism within Judaism, and then we go to Manichaeanism, which
Hmm.
kind of combines Zoroastrianism with
Gnosticism.
yeah, with Gnosticism in a weird way, and then we have the emergence of Saint Augustine, and maybe you can tell us about that. It's such a important Christian thinker, Saint Augustine.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think that ultimately, like what we were saying about the cheat codes, ultimately, when you get right down to it, Manichaeism was basically collecting the cheat codes of various groups, putting them together, and then Mani presented himself as a prophet. And so his view was that he had, and keep in mind that these are now grabbing religions from from disparate areas. So Mani, for example, made reference to Zoroaster and made reference to Buddha and made reference to other religious groups, and then mixed in that old Gnosticism where the demon's the one making the earth and God's above him and you can't see it. So in that sense, Manichaeism, keep in mind, as this I believe points out in the wiki, it was it was a former major religion. Like this was a huge religion back then. Like being a Manichae, uh, you know, in the 6th or 7th century, would have been like being a Hindu today. Like it was a pretty big religion, and so the point is, it was in competition with the church, obviously, and Christianity, as you would say. Because now, keep in mind, we're dealing with Christianity now becoming the official religion of the empire, and all the battles that the state had to be involved in. A lot of people don't realize this, but because they're often misinformed by Roman Catholics. But an ecumenical council was a legal council. It was headed by the emperors. And so their job was to mediate between Christians and heretics. And so this sort of thing, the church was also a legal entity at this point. So Manichees, as they became much more popular, were a threat to the empire. There were times where you'd see the empire having to persecute Manichees. It was in this period that St. Augustine realized maybe I shouldn't be a Manichae and starts looking around for different religion. Of course, he wrote his Confessions, so whoever's read that knows his biography. But the point is, he eventually realized that what he was involved in was ultimately time wasting. And this is kind of, I hate to say it, but we see this same thread with occultism today. A lot of it is just massive time wasting. You can pretend you're, speaking to your spirit animal or whatever, and you're really maybe talking to a demon, if anyone at all. But the point is, you're not saving your soul. And that is what I think he realized, is that all the constructions he thought he had in life just turned out to be things in his mind. And once he realized that, he was like, he just decided to go to the church. And that's how he became one of the most important Christian leaders of all time.
yeah, and one of the things that the Pelagians and this is during 5th century.
Mhm.
Some of the Pelagians accused him of bringing some of this Manichaeanism into his view of sin.
Mhm.
So, very important question in the Christian teaching is about sin, and
Absolutely.
this is kind of what me and the resident sleeper got into it about too. It was about the story of the notion of sin, and yeah, I'd like for you to expound on the Manichaeans and Augustine and the Pelagians and maybe what this whole sin thing is about because
Okay, well, that's fair. I will say this, that on the question of sin, St. Augustine really presents it, I would say, in an almost gifted manner. So well, as a matter of fact, that people have been mad at him ever since. And so the point is, the Pelagians were mad at him because they were of the idea that humans could be perfectible regardless. Like, you could coincidentally be saved without Christ, and you just had to do all the right things. You could be perfect. And St. Augustine, in response, talked about the natural depravity of man against God, and why we need Christ for salvation. And this is part of the reason why the Pelagians hated him, but it's also the reason why every other group that hates St. Augustine hated him afterwards. Because it's always, do I really need that, or aren't I good enough? And ultimately, that's a real question. People love saying that, aren't I good enough? Or do you go to heaven if you're a good person? Like, that's the thinking is, it's in it right off the bat, it's a cheat code. It's just like, find a way to get to salvation without Christ. And it doesn't work. So I think St. Augustine's presentation ultimately was not only very orthodox, but it changed the shape of the world, and people are still fuming about that 1,600 years later.
Hate the sin and not the sinner. Is that a direct quote from him?
That is such a common quote. I'm gonna have to check. Give me a second.
Yeah, I thought I heard that. Hate the sinner.
Hate the sin, love the sinner.
Hate the sin, love the sinner. I thought that was his quote. Which is a fascinating one.
I'm trying to see where that came from. Let me see here. Yeah, it's not in the Bible. There's similar concepts, but it's not actually there. Let me see here. Would you believe according to Google, the clearest use of this phrase actually derives from Mahatma Gandhi in his 1929 autobiography. I'm not kidding.
Okay.
I just type it into Google.
Yeah. Mahatma Gandhi, huh?
Yeah, I didn't see that one coming. I thought it was older than that.
I thought it came from the St. Paul quote, in Romans 7, where he says, "It is not me that sin, but the sin living in me that causeth me to sin."
Yeah.
And I thought, poof, man, I'll never understand that.
Our human nature is sinful. That's what Augustine got right across the bat. And he basically said, you need Christ, because by yourself, you're so messed up, you're never going to get there yourself. And the Pelagians were saying the exact opposite, which is why they hated him so much. Because they were like, of course we can get to heaven by ourselves. And he's like, no, you can't. You're terrible. And so, that it hurts people's pride to hear that. It sends, it kind of makes people think like, what do you mean I'm not good enough? Like, we wake up, how many daily affirmation sites are there? How many daily affirmation apps? How many people? It's been, I don't know if you remember Al Franken from Saturday Night Live, where he would do this comedy character, and the guy was just like a coach and would be like, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and people like you. And he would say this to himself in the mirror and like tell people to, say that. But the whole point is, that's why we live in the world of participation trophies. There's too much affirmation of bad things. We need to get out of that and realize we need to get better. And we get better by coming to Christ. That's how we see it.
Yeah, Al Franken. It's funny because the only time I heard of Al Franken was when they had all these conspiracy videos going around, and they said that he wrote in his book that he got a call on September 11th that told him, like, not to come to work because he was Jewish. And,
Well,
like, it was like,
first off, you see, if he said that, which I don't doubt it. Al Franken has shown himself to be a real liar over the past few decades. But in the first place, if you know anything about New York, you would know that if he was on Saturday Night Live at that time, NBC filmed at 30 Rock. 30 Rock is it's like 50, 60 blocks from the World Trade Center. It's far away. If he was going to work, there was absolutely no difference that would have happened to him whatsoever on that day. None. And so that sounds like him making up a story that just, and I can totally see it because he lies.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, Al Franken, another part of the, elite Jews that were there during the time of Christ, as well. But yeah,
At least he wasn't dancing though.
Yes. So you have, so you have Manichaeans, coming in the, you have Saint Augustine coming in the 5th century.
Mm-hmm.
And you have lots of interesting concepts with Saint Augustine talking about evil and sin. One of the concepts he came up with was about sin being evil being a premonition on the good. I don't know if you're kind of aware.
I'm not familiar with that particular concept. What do you mean by a premonition of the good? Like,
Well,
you mean like kind of like an indicator of future good, or
just the concept that sin, evil is just an absence of good. So whereas existence has goodness in it.
Mhm.
Evil is actually like nothingness, or something. Saint Augustine actually.
Yeah, I think that one could make that argument that evil is simply the absence of good, but it still produces like abhorrent results in real life. I mean, just to, one of the things that the early fathers taught is that creation before the fall of man, there was no killing, there was no death. And also that insects didn't exist, that they're kind of a byproduct of the fall. But the whole point was, like, if you look, as fun as it is to watch a cat kill a mouse some days, when you think about that at its most basic, that's pretty barbaric. And when you think about it in terms of, animals killing humans, humans killing humans, look at the streets in many major cities. Humans are terrible. Like, it's just, we're just terrible at, doing things, because what ends up happening is, without God, without the guidance of God, our societies collapse. And we've seen it happen many, many times.
Yes, and now we move to a figure that is a little bit around that time, but moving a little bit to the east, there, kind of into the Ostrogoths and that area, which is Boethius.
Mm-hmm. That's the west. The Boethius is he's in Western Rome.
The Western world, the Ostrogoths. So you have further west. Yeah, I'm sorry, further west. The opposite way. Of course. East, you have all of that.
Well, the Ostrogoths were the Eastern Goths, but they were still in the West. Now, keep in mind,
right.
a lot of the Goths at this time were still Aryan, because the Aryans.
That's another thing I wanted to bring in was the Ostrogoth kings and their kind of Arianism, and how they imprisoned Boethius. They actually locked Boethius in jail, where he wrote this work called The Consolation of Philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to hear.
Would become one of the Consolation of Philosophy would become one of the most popular books of the next probably 700 years.
Yes.
It would be like, to compare it to, I don't even know what kind of, I guess it would be like comparing it to probably like something like Mark Twain or Ernest Hemingway, something that has long lasting value, but at the same time isn't scripture. And I bring this up because, Boethius is fairly new to me. I was, he, in a sense, he's pretty marginal as a Christian scholar. While he has some historical importance, in the end, the book that you're describing, he wrote from prison. And it's completely devoid of Christian references. Mostly it's a philosophical discourse, where ultimately he's kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, he's kind of coping with what's going to happen to him. And he's doing it in an almost, I don't want to say atheistic way, but kind of close to atheistic way, which is uncharacteristic for a Christian writer of the time. But it would be, I guess you could say, so influential that as I was, before I came on, because I was not even sure what we were going to talk about, that I found that this particular, the dialogue, what was it called again? His book?
Consolation of Philosophy.
Yeah. Apparently, I looked that up. Apparently, throughout the Middle Ages, it was basically popular music. They actually would use the Consolation of Philosophy, text with instrumentation, and they would actually be singing it. It was literally early pop music, for lack of a better word. My bishop disagrees, but that's, just depends on how you define pop music or popular music. But the whole point is, so in that sense, and ironically, now if you look at many of the church fathers, they condemn popular music a lot of the time because the church has music, and so you're supposed to pray, and that's good enough. But this was, Boethius, I guess you could say, was probably the biggest contributor to popular music of the ages all the way up to the 12th and 13th century.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff, and it goes to his kind of like the, I guess, the Platonic kind of influence. Plato talked about the music of the spheres.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these types of things. In his work.
That's ironic, then. That's pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, and then and I think it's fascinating that his work was also used, by students like Isidore and stuff, and it actually contributed to the construction of the Blue Mosque, which was actually the church, the Church of Istanbul. Constantinople over there.
Well, the Hagia Sophia was the church of, that one was the church. The Blue Mosque, actually, if I remember correctly, was built because the Hagia Sophia was so large and popular that, if I forget which emir it was, but effectively he was like, we need to make a better mosque. And ultimately the Blue Mosque was built to make a better mosque than the one that they had in Hagia Sophia.
Yeah. Yeah, but that building is the original.
They're both architectural marvels, absolutely.
Yeah, but the original building was actually used, built through this, the trivium and quadrivium, sort of methods that were actually, I guess, proscribed first by Boethius and his student Isidore.
Isidore Mercator. Okay. I didn't know that, but that actually makes a lot of sense because the Hagia Sophia is, by its nature, it's a mathematical wonder that you see in real life. And what I mean by that is the way they designed it. Few people realize it unless you've either been inside or taken a good view of it, like from watching video, etc. They designed it so that it's a dome sitting on top of a dome. But at the intersection is all windows to create the impression that, one, the top is separated from the bottom, and two, it's separated by light. It is still architecturally very difficult to do. There have been some copies of the original Hagia Sophia, none that size. I think one of them comes close in Poland or something like that. But so definitely. It's amazing stuff, but that was, I guess you could say, that was led to, I guess, the prime age of architecture in the Byzantine period. So yeah,
Excellent. And that'll move us to some of the other things I wanted to talk about, because that moves us right into the 6th and 7th century. And so I wanted to open up and talk about the rise of Islam, during this time, and how it fared against. And I'm going to apply the same treatment to Islam. And I want you to come in at any point you feel, or any questions you have,
sure.
in terms of that. But yeah, I'm gonna try to describe the early sectarian conflicts in Islam, because many people are gonna say, well, what's the use of you describing these early sectarian conflicts in Christianity? Are you trying to disprove Christianity, sir? And I'll say, no, I'm just
Yeah,
talking
it's
about
part of
history.
history. Yeah, it's part of
Yeah,
history. There's no way
yeah.
around.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just talking about history, it naturally split off in these ways. And of course, the same thing can be applied to Islam. So I'm not going to shirk away from talking about Islam, and I'm not going to hold anything back when I show the history of that, beginning with the, the prophets, then the Sunni Shia split that happened right after, and then the split into the 5 madhabs, and which is the 5 distinct groups of Sharia law, and some of the changes of how it got mixed into the medieval stages there. So I guess I'll begin with the prophet. We had the prophet of Islam, and we have the unification of the Arab tribes there. I guess in Arabia. So from there you have a prophet that comes, and he's from a Christian family, and by Christians I mean Aryans. So he's from so his family is from an Aryan sect. So from uh, I guess from Father Joseph's position, these would not be considered Christians. They would be considered.
Right, but are we talking about like the parents of Muhammad?
Oh, we're talking about his wife and his wife's family.
Oh, okay, I thought
Oh,
because I thought Muhammad's family was pagan, but yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the Banu Quraysh, yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's very correct.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's very correct. Yeah, his
Aryans would
family was big. Yeah,
yeah yeah Aryans would be considered obviously not part of the church, correct? Yeah, they'd be a
yeah.
separated group, but you can see why they'd exist because lots of different groups existed at that time.
And then we have the Battle of Yarmouk. In the Battle of Yarmouk, you have Nestorians and Arabs fighting together. So you have Christian Arabs fighting with the regular Arabs against Rome. On all of these types of things. So you have this type of thing where you have this cultural mix that Arabs mix culturally with the other Arabs.
Yeah,
Regardless of their religious background. And you have the tribe of, I guess one of the tribes is called the tribe of Hassan. There's a prominent tribe of Nabateans. I think they have actually the number of Nabateans that fought with the prophet at the battle, or with the Muslims at the battle.
mhm.
So they have these different groups that, of Christian Arabs that actually joined with, and of course at the city of Petra, you have this huge, Nabatean movement over there. So you have this large, movement of Christian Arabs there. So a lot
Yeah,
of them, yeah,
I can add to that part. You're not actually wrong there because in many cases, what you find is like with the Nestorians and with the Monophysites, etc., because the state would basically try to defend Chalcedonian Orthodoxy. It often treated these groups less kindly, and so when during the time of Islamic expansion, there were cases where the Byzantine Empire was trying to put its foot down, and frankly, these people would side with other groups just to stop their advances. So that did happen. Okay. I think he's back. Hold on. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, sorry about that. I spilled some coffee.
No worries.
Ran over there to go grab it. Yeah, because I seen it falling over there. But yeah, like I turned the button on and then it's just dripping on the floor. But yeah, but yeah, bless you guys. But yeah, yeah, it goes to the Nabateans there,
Mhm.
and in some of those groups, and of course, you have also in the city of Medina, huge tribes of Jews. So you have the Banu Khazar and all those types of people. So there's the tribe of Ghassan. There's Banu Khazar. So you have people who follow basically monotheism. Already in the area. Of Arabia before the Prophet Muhammad unifies the Arab tribes under Islam. What does basically the Prophet Muhammad come to teach is that the angel Gabriel visited him. This is very short version of it, that the angel Gabriel visited him when he was in a cave, and said that he has a new revelation for the prophet, and the prophet went back to tell his Christian wife about it, basically telling her that he's very afraid he's been tricked, that some wrong's happening to him, and she says to him that that he what he saw was probably true, So he goes on believing it, and then he tries to tell his tribesmen about it, and they attack him viciously, until he unifies them, and then moves on to conquer the neighboring territories with the unified Arab tribes. So Islam goes, the Arab tribes become unified, and they go on to conquer, and even some of the non-Muslim Arab tribes join within some of these battles, as we've seen.
They have their own grievances as well, yeah.
Oh, of course. And of course, monophysites and all this stuff. They have long-standing feud with the church. Even later, some of the monophysite writers. I think one of them said, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Pope's tiara," or something.
That was actually, I believe, Alexander Nevsky. That was in Russia, and that was actually it was actually planning a long range strategy. And the reason why is because he realized in that particular battle, I forget exactly which one it was, but he realized that you had the Turks on the one side, and you had the Knights of Sweden on the other. And his thinking was very simply, we're going to look at this long term. If we let the Swedes win, effectively unify against the Turks, then ultimately the Christians will be easier to be seduced to the Roman Catholic religion. Whereas if he goes under the Turks, Orthodoxy survives, and the Muslims aren't going to try to convert them. They just are going to extract, the jizya, etc. So his long-term thinking was the survival of Orthodoxy, and he realized that a false version of it could much more easily subvert it.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
Yeah, for a military leader, that's some serious long-range thinking. He's thinking generations ahead.
Yeah, and in terms of and I'll give you some of my sources after I'm done with this, because I have a long list of sources, especially in my book. I have a bunch of.
I definitely believe you. We're touching a lot of stuff here.
Yeah. It is how it is, and I hope you'll notice that I have looked into a lot of these things, and I have this book here, The History of Philosophy by Copleston, Frederick Copleston. I read the medieval philosophy version, so I could take a look at some of the early writers in the church and all that stuff. And I also read this book called Narrow Gate Churches by a Christian Arab named Atala Mansour. I
Is
can't
that a
really
new book or
narrow
how?
gate narrow gate churches. Yeah, it's fairly new, but yeah, he talks about interesting history of Christian Arabs living in the Middle East. And especially how many of the different Christian groups, even living in survived until the establishment of modern day Israel, and how the Christian minorities in Israel, some of the most discriminated groups because they're seen as untrustworthy by both the Jews and the Muslims. So they get treated rather poorly. And of course, they don't belong to the main, Catholic or Orthodox Church. So they're just kind of very, very much, an embattled group of people in the world. But yeah,
Well, I mean, the I guess the big problem that I have, and I feel, don't get me wrong, I feel for those people as well. But like, you have to understand that. I mean, have you ever been to the Holy Land?
no, sir,
Okay.
I
I
wouldn't
have
be.
not. I haven't either. But my wife was there for a few years, and
Yeah, I don't think
basically,
I don't think I would go, even if I was invited.
well, no, you're not now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But here's my point: is that intertwined? It's a city. Jerusalem, in that sense, especially the old city, is a city intertwined with history. Christian, Muslim, Jewish history. But the whole point is that, like, for example, there is a Church of the Resurrection, which is built upon the tomb where the resurrection occurred. And there are churches that are commemorating events. And of course, you know about the Dome of the Rock. All these things commemorate events. The problem is that Protestantism, when it developed, was not convinced because they basically disdained tradition in general. And so they started coming up in the 18th and 19th centuries with cockamamie ideas of saying, oh, Jesus' tomb is actually here based on what we think we read in the Bible. And they start coming up with all these alternate sites, whereas the church and even the Roman Catholics were in agreement with the Orthodox as to where these things happen. All of a sudden, these new people are like, we're going to put them over here by these rocks that nobody cared about for 1,500 years. And then, so of course, my view is, I mean, I feel for them as people, but I think like a lot of the belief systems that that Americans have brought over have actually caused the region harm. Because what was established now, it's like, you ever see that meme where they're like it's the manga versus the anime, like that kind of like, it was this good and now it's this
Yeah.
much worse. And then Netflix interpret, like that's what it is, like Netflix interpretation Christianity. And it's just like, you gotta feel for someone who actually believes that stuff, but like it makes no sense.
Yeah, I've had my share of interactions with the diorites and all that type of people. You know,
Yeah, they're
unfortunately.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. This guy right here, I think. Have you ever heard of this guy? And I know you debate with the Muslims all the
Jafar.
time.
Yeah, I mean only Hamza so far, but that's just because
Yeah.
he just we don't do, we don't really talk after that last time he threw me off. I'm pretty mad at him. But
Oh yeah.
let me see who this is. This is, now he's Shia. I'm not sure. He's the
Yes.
founder of the Jafari. Now keep in mind, once we start talking about Jafari, I know absolutely nothing. So at this point, it's all you, because I know about like the Sunni Shia split, and then after that,
That's what this was about, because this is a seminal figure in the Sunni Shia split. For most people who
okay,
don't know, so the prophet dies, and of course there's this problem of the successor. Who's going to be the successor of the prophet? And this culminates in the Sunni Shia split, because the Sunnis say it should be the appointed successors of the prophet. But the Shia say that it should be that the prophet obviously appointed his own family to lead after him. So so they get into this huge split, and in this split, this figure right here, Jafar al-Sadiq, he is the main guy in the split because the people who the Shias consider to be their first imam is this guy Jafar al-Sadiq. You know,
Okay.
so he was he's kind of a seminal figure. But if you read right here, it's very interesting because if you read about Islamic jurisprudence, it says Al Sadiq is also important to Sunnis. You know, and you go, well, why is that? It's because he's a jurist and a transmitter of hadith as a teacher to the Sunni scholars, Imam Abu Hanifa and Ibn Maliki. So Maliki and Hanifa were both educated by this man Jafar al-Sadiq, who's the starter of the Shia tradition. So
Wow.
it's so two of the mainline Sunni scholars were actually taught by the first imam of the Shia. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is that in the beginning they weren't that different. It's only over time that these splits become a lot more crazy and really powerful. But yeah, they say there's like you know uh, 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 they say there's Hanafi, Shafi'i, there's Maliki, and there's Ahmadi. These are four different schools of Islamic jurisprudence that come at different times during hundreds of years after the prophet's death. So they
Yep.
open up these five different interpretations of Sharia law, and two of them came from the top Shia teacher, or the head of the Shias, because it's his family, that gets split into two and causes the difference between the Shia sects. So all the Shia sects trace their origin from this
Particular
teacher.
figure. Hmm.
Yeah. Jafar al-Sadiq. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, is because the Mutazilites actually trace their origin from this guy too.
What is a Metazolite?
A Mutazilite is a sect that almost took over the whole Islamic religion,
Wow.
and they believe that they believed basically a heretical sect, that took over the Islamic, almost took over the whole Islamic religion
Wow.
after the Prophet's death. And now, whatever they teach, and this parallels the Christian thing, because it's just like how we were saying, like almost all the Christians, were like Aryans, or these groups were so
Or
prominent.
Nestorians, yeah. Hmm. And then history changes over time.
Yeah, of course. They used to be huge teachers, and one of these teachers is called Abdul Jabbar, you know, existing in 900 CE. But yeah, man, I don't know why it's talking about Saint Thomas here. It says yeah, it says his book is like of the magnitude of Saint Thomas Aquinas. I don't know why they would mention him, but yeah.
Well, then Thomas Aquinas wrote a lot. I mean, his Summas alone are like, 35, 40 volumes. So that to be compared to Thomas Aquinas implies he wrote quite a lot.
Yeah, but one of the things these guys came to the idea of was that they said that God is good. So they said that goodness necessarily flows from God. So that God actually doesn't have any free will because God is all good.
Ah,
So they believed in this fundamental nature of God, in which I guess they believed that the Quran was created by God, through His free will. But I guess a lot of Muslims came to the conclusion that the Quran is actually eternal.
Yeah.
You know, the- uh, just like all of Allah's commands are basically eternal.
Well, and that's one of the things that I mean, I've heard apologists against Islam, for example, talk about this particular concept of the
Yeah,
eternal
right.
Quran.
Yeah,
And this is something that actually confused me because, I mean, it does appear, and this is obviously not representative of all Muslims, but it does appear that some people like they get superstitious about it. Like, you ever see a video like the cat won't touch the Quran, and then David Wood puts cat food next to the Quran, and the cat touches the Quran, and I'm like,
oh,
do people
David
really
Wood.
care about this?
David Wood loves this Mutazilite thing
Okay.
because he thinks that the Mutazilites constitute like some true version of Islam that got completely wiped out, or that Islam didn't know what it was talking about, so it split off into these different groups. And of course, you've seen the same treatment been offered about Christians.
Yeah.
They say, well, you know, uh, how come the Aryans almost, took over if there was, if the church was so strong, it was chosen
Yeah.
by God.
Because
How
it
come
was
they
not
almost,
that simple. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's not that simple. So it got into that type of thing. But this guy, Jafar al-Sadiq, and I've never heard any Muslim thinkers bring this up. I'm really the first one. I don't want to say I'm like the first one, but
Maybe the first one in English, but
right,
when you're
right.
dealing with religions that are really old, somebody said it somewhere, just probably not in English.
Yeah, but it was kind of this uneasy mix about free will. The concept was mainly the issue was about free will, and I'll get into what this means because Jafar al-Sadiq had a very interesting notion, in terms of free will, because somebody had asked him about free will, and he had such an interesting quote that I'll read it right now because because I think that this quote is dastardly. And also another interesting fact was that Jafar al-Sadiq was seen as the creator of alchemy, and this actually goes to more places than Arabia. He was seen as the creator of, I guess, science in that way, where you could observe nature. Because I guess in Islam, since God is not in the world, I'm totally exalted. The purpose for studying the world is basically just methodological atheism. And it goes, and this is how Islam and Christianity kind of discovered science was because they kind of said, well, the physical world is impermanent, so they accepted studying the physical world based off of just pure physical constituents.
Yeah.
They weren't willing to put this pantheistic or this crazy spiritual element into the world while studying it, so that they could had this kind of strange concepts, magic and all these kinds of things that the animists kind of use to study the world. you know but this quote that he says it says it says Al-Sadiq is credited with the statement that God does not, quote, order created beings to do something without providing for them a means of not doing it, though they do not do it or not do it without God's permission, unquote. And then it says Al-Sadiq declared, quote, whoever claims that God has ordered evil, he has lied about God. Whoever claims that both good and evil are attributed to him, he has lied about God. In his prayers, he often said, there is no work of merit on my own behalf or on behalf of another, and in evil there is no excuse for me or for another. So it
Well, I
can't.
think that
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense in terms of Protestantism Christian tradition is that God is not the author of evil. So to that end, that makes sense. It's I question, and I have to ask, and I mean, you know better than I do. Part of I think one of the people like, and I hate to call him out again, but like David Wood, et cetera, make the argument, for example, that basically God is kind of the author of evil, and I've heard this argument before, and I'm trying to figure out if that is a valid argument. Would that's it? Because if God is not the author of evil, then there are consequences, obviously, in just almost anything you can think of, because ultimately it's a fundamentally different worldview to assume that God is responsible for all of it. This is something we find in early discussions of predestination and Calvinism, etc. So yeah, it makes a big difference whether God is or is not the author of evil. And so I would say that, that is an interesting point that I'm not aware of. I did not, that actually does kind of change, it does change the question. Give me one moment, please. Hold on.
Of course.
It does change the question of, ultimately changes the question of whether or not, if God is not the author of evil, as we believe, in that case, then that would mean that claims that, say, for example, that would mean ultimately you'd have to reread like a lot of the arguments that are presented with, say, for example, with Islam, because a lot of them are built on these inbuilt assumptions. And so this is one of the trickier, but this is ultimately, it's not just a discussion that has to be had outside Islam. To some degree, it's a discussion that has to be held inside Islam as well, because there are people who do hold to misconceptions. Like, for example, like I mentioned that there's a guy on Twitter named El Arante who points out some very interesting things about Islam from where he is, which is in the Caucasus, and how they do things. But, he'll mention things like, it's illegal in our jurisprudence to marry above up below this age or that age, usually 16 or something like that. But then you have somebody like Ali Dawa come out, and he's just like, well, of course you can marry someone at 9. I was like, don't, which is it? It's going to cause problems for people who just I imagine that if I see something like that, if a regular Muslim family raising their kids normally, etc., and then you have some guy Mohammed Hijab going, well, technically 5-year-olds are okay.
Yeah, those guys are about as good as all these dire guys on your side.
Exactly.
They do a lot more damage than good, and then there's people like us having real conversations that nobody listens to. so it's essentially what's going on. We've been pigeonholed, but yeah, I mean, Ali Dawa, I just think it's so cringe. This guy walking around,
and with a huge YouTube following.
One of his videos, it's very cringe. He tells these sisters to look at his phone because he has a message on his phone that says, thank you for being brave enough to wear the hijab. It's like, why are you approaching sisters in public? This is obviously wrong. You shouldn't be approaching women in public. It's like I don't even understand. Like they're breaking an Islamic rule to make a point about Islam. It just doesn't even make sense, So I just think that these teachers or these thinkers, well, they're not learned in anything other than philosophy. They have philosophy degrees. They're not trained to teach these subjects or to talk about these subjects. I just, that's the thing that I find incredible, is that they're not engaging in philosophical debates. They're engaging in theological debates willy-nilly. So
they're unqualified for what they do. Yeah. Well, I think that's not their ultimate goal. And if you take Mohammed Hijab, where was he on last? Piers Morgan, which is, of course, that's national TV. You flip it over, you look at Jay Dyer. He moved up to InfoWars. They're all trying to just climb a clout ladder for, money and to be, famous, etc. And they don't. I hate to say that, but when it comes down to it, people doing that they're sacrificing a little bit of their integrity. I mean, they're getting something out of it, but yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the world. It's that cheat code again. It's like you think you're being a good person, but at the same time, you're willing to sell out. I completely get that.
Yeah, Muhammad Hijab, put your shirt on and stop embarrassing Islam. This is terrible. You're a joke. You're a scumbag. You're just total grifter. I can't believe. I wouldn't be in the same room as these people. I mean, you're coming out representing.
Yeah, but you're kind of thin. He'd be like, "I will eat you."
The funny thing about me is that I have a Jewish wife. I smoke weed, and even I know these things. I mean, I can't even believe it. You know what I mean? This is crazy. You know what I mean? That I have to educate these people in this way. How
many followers do you have? It's like so. That's my favorite thing when people say, "How many followers do you have?" It's like, okay, really? Is my correctness or incorrectness based on my follower count? It's just silly. You just got to keep going and just doing what you do, and, it's important to learn and it's important to, spread knowledge. We live, and this is the worst part of it. It all goes back to that thing where before the internet, we had gatekeepers and they kept all the information as well as they could. And it's like everyone wants to be the new gatekeeper. And it's not going to work. And maybe, the grifters will make money off it. But in the process, a lot of people become misinformed.
Yes. And that's what's going on in terms of, I guess just in terms of people's understanding of Islam too,
Yeah.
People don't understand how it came up. They don't understand that Islam had as many pitfalls in terms of Neoplatonism and all of these types of things. All of these doctrines, as did Christianity. And one of the main factors of this was these Mutazilite people. The whole Mutazilite movement. And one of the main priests of Islam was named Ibn Hanbal. He got thrown in jail by the Mutazilites. He's known as like one of our greatest preachers today. As this teacher, and of course, when you debate Muslims, you'll know about all these things because, Al-Ashari, who was a great teacher, was fallen into the Mutazilite school, and then he kind of grew out of that, and that's where Imam Ghazali got his whole rejection of Avicenna and all of these philosophers. By the time you get to Avicenna, and I don't know if you're aware of Ibn Sina, or Avicenna as he's known in the West.
Yeah, I've scanned over his information once or twice. It's like Averroes,
This is why I think Muhammad Hijab is so dangerous. Another reason is because he's using these theological arguments that have been rejected in Islam for centuries, like
really?
the argument, yeah, like this argument from contingency, where there's the necessary and the contingent and all these
scholastic arguments, yeah.
The cosmological argument of Ibn Sina was invented in 900 A.D. And of course he was an outproduct of this Mutazilite school.
Okay.
That was saying that God creates through necessity, through His own nature, and of course you could see how these people got caught up in this heresy,
scholasticism.
Yeah, kind of thing, and of course Ghazali's major rejection of this was in the notion that I guess these Neoplatonists, they believe that the world was eternal, first of all. So they believe that God didn't create the world, that He just kind of organized it.
That's back to that Gnosticism again, with the angel shaping Earth. Yeah,
exactly. and people don't even know how that's, how Gnosticism is related to Neoplatonism in very significant ways, as you just mentioned. But they had this idea that if God decides to create the world at this time rather than that time, then that signifies a change in God's thinking. So that means that he changed his mind. So Ghazali said, imagine if I held out two equally succulent dates in each of my hands and you just picked one. He said, your decision wouldn't be arbitrary. He said, before time, if I pick this moment instead of that moment, how is that an arbitrary choice? There's no time. you know so he said I just chose, one moment looks as good as any other moment. If there's no time to start anything. And that was his argument against them. It was fascinating.
Yeah, that's crazy, but but yeah, it's that's, and I think that's one of the big dangers with not just philosophy, but especially with scholasticism. You end up in a world of over definition. In the West, there were people having arguments by the 14th century of how many angels could be fit on the head of a pin. And this was a real question, and it never occurred to people that it's really dumb to ask how many angels can you fit on the head of a pin. This had to be explained, and this is this pops up in the Council of Florence when the Orthodox, the Church, is arguing against the Roman Catholics, and they're trying to come to terms for a union before the fall of Constantinople, which it doesn't work. History newsflash. But the point is, at one point, the Orthodox began talking about, sin and death and hell. And then one of the questioners, a Dominican friar, a Roman Catholic friar, he says to the effect of, he's like, well, what exactly is hell? Like, what's the substance of hellfire? And so a guard that had been standing on the side of the Orthodox party was like, the questioner will receive a satisfactory answer when he experiences it personally. So the point is, because when you think it's a stupid question, if you know it's bad and you know it's fire, why do you really want it? How bad is it? Like, eventually it just becomes nonsense.
Yeah. One of the ways that Ghazali argued against the Neoplatonists was about cotton burning. So he said, so they would talk about natural law, and he said that the whole notion of natural law cuts off God's hands from His creation. So he said this. Yeah. So he said, he wrote a whole work called "The Incoherence of the Philosophers," where he discussed all these things. And the first two people he went against is Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, who came after him later. But he was actually not born yet. But
I would imagine that if you've read this book, then YouTube debates must be highly what's the word? Mind numbing.
Boring. Yeah. I mean, if you can imagine, Ghazali wrote a book hundreds of pages long, dismantling all of the philosophy of his time, called "Incoherence of the Philosophers." Then Averroes wrote one double the length of that, called "The Incoherence of the Incoherence."
Wow!
and attempted to refute the whole entire book that Ghazali wrote. And the way it literally reads is, they present the person's argument in great detail first, and then they present their argument against it. So first they write for pages and pages. I mean, I'm talking about their explanations of Neoplatonism and all of these things. They were some of the best explanations they had at the time. They explained their opponents' arguments better than their opponents could before they dismantled them. I mean, it's just incredible the type of stuff that Saint Aquinas and these guys were doing. They were dictating like 3 or 4 different people and writing like 20 books. I mean, you look at the number of books that St. Augustine wrote. Good Lord. Good God Almighty. just that's a miracle to me. It's how does somebody write that many goddamn books? I mean, I've written like one 400-page book, and it took.
And
me
we
like
had
5 years.
we type our books too. Like he had to write them.
Oh,
But
oh, I actually did write mine by hand first. Yeah.
oh really? Oh, well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I did
can't
not. I'm
sit
not
there.
even going to pretend to. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't sit there and type on the computer. Just the light will zap all of my brain waves. So I have to just sit there and write on a notepad and then transcribe it on the computer. So I can minimize my time there. But yeah, I always write like that. It's much easier to just sit at a park bench and just write. Sitting at a computer hunched over and trying to come up with something, you know, I hate
drains
that.
you. The screen even will drain you a bit when you're doing that. But yeah. So what was I going to say? So yeah, it's what this does lead to actually, because now that leads me, since you brought this up, because one may ask, how did like scholastic philosophy, because as you know, it obviously you mentioned it kind of infiltrated Islam, etc. But where did it come from? And what I would say is this: if we go back, and it's amazing how history works in perfect time. But when we go back to the period of the 11th century, what we find is that the Great Schism, as it's commonly thought of, is usually thought of between East and West. But in reality, the Great Schism was actually, East kind of just was standing there. The empire was mostly centered in Byzantium, etc. But in the West, it was massive civil war. Around the time of the Great Schism, there was already a party that was considered a reforming party, and it would be kind of solidified under Hildebrand of Savannah. And what he was doing was he was actually, effectively, he had been pope for a few years, and he came up with a document, and it was called the Dictatus Papae. It's a set of 28 theses, which if you read it, it's like the Pope is supreme above all the earth. The Pope is above all the princes of the earth. Nobody can call a synod without the Pope. Nobody can make bishops without the Pope. So like literally, it is the blueprint of Roman Catholicism. Needless to say, bishops, etc., in the West were horrified by this, and it led to massive civil war over the next 25 to 30 years. So you're seeing wars in Spain, you're seeing wars in England, you're seeing wars in France, in Germany, between the emperor, who then he basically called the synod together. They deposed Hildebrand, and they made a new pope, who's now known as Anti-Pope Clement III. And he was actually in charge in Rome for the next 20 years, while the Hildebrandians were like a weird sect that was basically hiding among its own loyalists. But effectively, they managed, after Clement III's death, to begin taking back to take the city of Rome for themselves. And what ends up happening is that ultimately, okay, yeah, no problem. Ultimately, that group, for the Hildebrandian group, had Anselm of Lucca, and he was one of the early fathers of scholasticism, which would lead to Thomas Aquinas, the creation of that, and ultimately the creation of the Roman Catholic Church we know today.
Thank you, Brother Swayden, for the explanation. We actually have the Christian half of the show is joining us now, so I'm glad to have him here. But
How's it going?
my brother, I'm in a Neurojack. I'm sure he'll have a couple questions and things for you if we could hear him. Sometimes we got technical difficulties here, but yeah, bless.
No worries.
Yeah, hello, Father Joseph. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. God bless you.
Yes, God bless you guys both. And yeah, thank you for having me on. I just wanted to jump in while I had a chance. I was cooking and stuff like that, kind of busy, but it's a very interesting conversation, and I'm going to definitely derail, which is why I wasn't in a rush to jump up and bother you guys. But I kind of had a few questions that I want to ask, because I'm sure it will lead to more questions. Like I think I spoke with you before, and I told you I do go to a Eastern Orthodox church, and but I'm kind of hesitant to jump in head first, just because I did grow up as a Baptist, as a general. Yeah, nice. I like that. Yeah. I do this for multiple reasons, but we're all Terminators at this point, so nice. But so I'm kind of dipping my toe into Orthodoxy slowly because I don't want to. It's hard. It is. Christianity is hard no matter what. But I think growing up in the United States and being a Christian, and then as in a general sense, like as a Baptist or as a just a non-denominational Christian, and then trying to understand all the problems with that and then move towards Orthodoxy or anything more stable is very difficult. And I think you can appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
yeah.
There's the issue. One of the issues that a lot of new converts have, and in this sense, I guess you could say somebody like the Machine Lie. Well, TML has more kind of advantage with history. Is that we're talking about customs, etc., that sometimes go back 2,000 years, even before that. So it can be disconcerting for especially a younger Christian who either grew up with or just learned about Christ from a Bible study group, etc. And what was just a book, in fact, is a gateway to an entire other kind of world, for lack of a better term. But in a sense, that's something that one can one can feel negative about, but it can also be something that is kind of amazing. And what I mean by that is that when you think about, for example, the Eucharist, and you think about the services that are done around that, the Divine Liturgy, you're literally transporting yourself back to the time of Christ and the apostles. It is occurring directly in front of you because it is one united Eucharist from then to now. So in some ways, it's kind of an amazing thing. It's awe-inspiring when you think about it. But once you do get a taste of that, it's very hard to go back. And I've seen that people have tried to kind of cope with it over time. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the convergence movement. So you people are like, I can't let go, but just let go. And, look forward to becoming Orthodox.
Yeah, I mean, ever since growing up, I've always had the experience of, like, the closer you try to get to actually being a Christian, the more that you kind of just find yourself alone. So I'm very comfortable with that, but I think that it is, like, just barely stepping through the door, like you said, it's like it opens up the door to so much more warfare. And so, and I think that, like, Machine is experiencing that as well. And a lot of people think that it's wrong for us to communicate even with someone like Machine Lies, who's a Muslim, because they say, well, you should have, that's too. It's not the place of a Christian to try and contextualize things historically or philosophically or theologically or anything like that. And I do reject that. I mean, I think we all have different roles to play, but I just wanted to mention that up front because some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is very, it will divide people very sharply, to put it that way.
Well, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that there are different kinds of people. Some people cannot handle certain discussions. Uncomfortable discussions are ones I'm very used to. And based on what I see from the Machine Lies, it seems like he's pretty used to them too. So the point is that, it's going to take it's going to take a lot to really kind of shock me, for lack of a better word. But you have to pick and choose your battles. If I know that somebody is, say, for example, has a very insecure faith, etc., I've actually had arguments with people where they've said things to me like, if you keep arguing like this, I mean, what choice would I have but just to give up on God altogether? And when I hear that, my instinct is to say, then I don't really have to have this discussion with you. I don't think I want to, because I'm not helping you. If perhaps the person was tempted to go that way anyway. You don't, as I put it, to when someone is 100% convinced they're right, I don't try to convince them otherwise, because there's no point. It's a futile argument.
No, I definitely feel that like I have reached a stage in my life where I am prepared enough to handle what I'm delving into, right? So I think that's important for me to keep in mind, and I'm saying some of this for the audience just as much as you, because
I understand.
It's very touchy, like people get very, very upset, and I understand. And in some ways that's a good sign, and in other ways it's not a good sign. I think, it's so here's my general question. Well, I have all the things I want to get into with you are related, so we don't have to keep them like long-winded, but whatever you want to take it from where I start is great. But they're all related, so they seem like all over the place, but I think that all these are kind of generally related. And I have more, but I should have wrote them down earlier. So first I want to start off with asking a question about when you read the story of like Solomon's temple and the way that was constructed via something like demon control or something, right? Like, is that fair to say, or is that
I'm gonna just quickly take a look as to what you mean. What do you mean by demon controlled?
Well, what I mean is that isn't it said that Solomon had some people believe that Solomon had the power to use magic to do certain things, right? And so there's this big debate that I see among people, and I'm trying to be kind of vague for a reason, but some people believe that that's okay to do, and other people think that that's not okay to do, and so they question as to whether, and I'll come out and say what I'm getting at, but this is not really people think this is against Christianity. It's not. I'm actually driving towards a larger point, but I just noticed that some people are comfortable with that kind of practice, and other people aren't. But what's your general attitude about that being in the Bible? What do you think that's trying to tell us about?
Well, if I'm gonna take a look here, if we're looking at this, let me see here, because give me just a moment. So this would be okay. So in this case, just going through 2 Samuel 24. Okay, so we're gonna, because Solomon's temple was the first temple, so that was on Mount Moriah. Let me a moment here. Let me see here, because I mean, ultimately, I guess what you're asking is some sort of majory okay? In terms of, I would say no. I would say, but I wouldn't say no on the simple basis that it's a binary yes, no, wrong, right or wrong. And what I mean by that is that Solomon's reasoning for it and probably his thinking on it were wrong, but they were used to glorify God. Likewise, you can find in the lives of some saints, for example, and one comes to mind, and I can't remember his name, but he's in the great Synaxarchist. And what happens is he ends up exorcising a demon from a woman. And at that point, the demon is like, can I leave? The saint decides, no, I think actually you can't. I think I want to make use of you. And so he basically commands the demon to cross the world. And, which the demon does. And the demon's like, I'll get you for this, etc. But then finally he comes back home. He lets the demon go. Well, the demon ends up causing him more problems over time. Like at one point, it even gets to the point where the demon's creating illusions of women's undergarments when he's walking to create the impression that he'd been with a woman, which leads to the town almost executing him. And it's at that point that God saves him, and he realizes his mistake in messing with forces unknown. So I would say that, in that case, Christians aren't supposed to do that. We've been given sufficient knowledge, will, and power to do things without resorting to that. I certainly would say that some of that stuff is hoaxed. Some of that stuff's quite believable. Some of it's demonic, and you shouldn't touch it just because it's a fire you don't know what you're playing with.
No, that's actually getting close to the point that I'm driving at. So so I do appreciate it. And let me ask this as a kind of an aside, but I think it is related. What do you think about the idea that the house of God is a traveling house versus building a temple? Because this is going to play into my last question, so I'm asking this up front because I think you'll kind of see where I'm going with this as we progress. Yeah.
Well, this is one of the reasons that this is unfortunate. Is the use of the term churches. In Russia, for example, churches are referred to in Russian as khram, or as temples. So there is a distinction between the church, which is the believers, and the temple, which is a building. Now, granted, there's also the theology of the body being the temple, etc., but the point is the basic distinction of believers as opposed to buildings was well established in language. So that's that's what I would say there. So I don't know where you're going with it, but I'd like to hear it.
Well, what I mean is, because
just to let you know, no one ever knows where Neuro's headed with this shit. It's just gonna go where it goes. You'll just end up somewhere. You'll be like, "How did I get to this?" But yeah, go ahead.
Usually, I don't even know fully either. Like I'm kind of on a stream of consciousness to some degree. So.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But this is not adversarial on purpose at all. And I'm just saying that because if it was, you would know. I think you would know already. But so. It's trying to comprehend a few different points that I'm stuck on, and that I think that people are capitalizing who are calling themselves Christians or are deceived Christians. That's what I'm that's why I'm asking, because I generally think that Eastern Orthodoxy, if you're going to be a Christian, has about as tight of a theological framework as you can possibly have from my experience. So that's why I'm definitely looking to you to help me understand some of this, because I do think it's something that Christians desperately need.
Sure, and I think it's inevitable. I think we've had centuries of bad theology in the West, and it's got to be fixed. I think now that we're in the information era, it can be. So I mean, yeah, I would say that. Ultimately, that theological solidity comes from centuries of painful history. It's not like, that there's a lot to it that caused that. So, I mean, I'd love to say that we can take credit for just having great theology, but the reality is it's because we had to go through lots of bad theology and the subsequent violence, and et cetera, that we had to deal with.
I totally agree. And so here's what I'm getting at with that traveling thing is, because I heard that at the beginning, and I could go on like 10 aside, so I'm trying not to. First of all, I'll say that what you said about how all the heresies are showing up as practices, and you guys are talking about Elaine Pagels, and I think that a lot of what we see in society is a cult practice without the theology. And I think similarly, that's what I see happening in Christianity, is you have a lot of Christian ritual without the theology to comprehend what's really going on, and I think that that's a problem in general. So,
well, I think that go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So what I'm asking about the traveling thing is because you guys are talking about how the Pharisees thought that you had to be in the temple, but they were obviously abusing that.
They
right?
thought you didn't have to be in the temple.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's where I was confused. Okay, but what I was saying is, before Solomon created the temple, basically it was a tabernacle or a tent of sorts, right, where you could pick up the pieces and move them around if needed be. And I think that generally that's the way the Eastern Orthodox look at churches as well. Like, if you destroy the house of God, we try to save what we can and we take it to the next location that we consecrate as Holy Land. Correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that also another side of Eastern Orthodox believe, and this is one thing I do really agree, is like they think that by acting as, and I'm saying all this as a prelude to what I'm going to say, because what I'm going to say after this, people are going to really not like, I think, but because
let's find out.
Yeah. So what I think is with the thing about being Christian, that you guys see it as you need to consecrate land, you need to consecrate people, right? You need to make them as holy as possible, because there is so much evil in the world and we're under constant attack. And so you guys see it as like by participating in things outside of the church, you're kind of making things holy as you go along, right? Like you try to make everything holy that you can throughout everything in your life. Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah, I would say that that's actually a pretty accurately holistic view of Orthodoxy. It's why we have things like holy water and processions, etc. Yeah, absolutely.
right? And
Bless
another
our food and
and another side of that is a collective sin. So you guys believe that basically the role of Christians is to not only pray for ourselves and our brethren, but to take consideration of all creation because it's all under attack simultaneously. Does that make sense? Like you're trying to say we're trying to purify ourselves not only to get us into the afterlife, but it's also to bring creation back to the state that it should be in. It's on some level. I mean, not saying that we're God or something like that, but we're trying to make ourselves more godlike through theosis to interact with creation in a way that makes it more holy overall in general. Does that make sense?
yes, I would take a somewhat more militant position on that, and what I mean by that is that Saint Justin correctly points out that he basically, the way he puts it is, Christians are few in number, but if there were no Christians, the world would end. Ultimately, we have to act in a preservative fashion. There's no way we're going to save the earth. There is no perfect earth that is ever going to come. That is all in the next life. That is all after judgment. What we have to do is save what we can. I often refer to the church as the guardians of time, because ultimately, once there is no more church, time's over. It's all over. We head to the end times and everything's done. So the point is, we can only preserve what was handed to us by the apostles and by the fathers. And so, yes, historically you can see some success, like Russia was an Orthodox country until the fall of the Tsar, etc. Those things can happen. Sometimes the church is small, sometimes the church is large. History has shown that can vary over time, but our goal is always to preserve what was handed to us, not so much as to try to outwardly create.
Right. And this all feeds into my larger point, which I'll get to in a few questions later. But my general thing I'm trying to get at is that it seems that we're defenders, not imperialists. Does that make sense? Like we're out there trying to conquer in a theological sense, not in a material sense, right? Like, so sometimes us winning will look like losing if you're looking at it from a materialistic view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true from a materialistic view. Now, it's one thing that I point out. I don't know how familiar you are with Orthodox practices, but in the Orthodox the Orthodox rite of marriage, crowns are placed upon the head of the bride and groom. Ideally, they own their crowns as opposed to having borrowed them from the church, which is a terrible practice because that's just renting. The point is, the difference between the crowns placed on the head of that couple and the crowns that are worn by the King of England, etc., the difference is 700-800 years. Ultimately, it is not the church that is going to conquer land. It is the people who are doing whatever, conquering land, and if they do that and sanctify the land in the name of Christ, okay, but that's not actually, the church doesn't govern. The church,
right?
Her role
that's individuals acting as individuals, whether they're a king or a knight or a farmer or whatever they're doing. They're all acting as individuals under the auspices of Jesus directly, although the church is more of a purification temple for those. I know it's more than that, but what I'm saying is, for an outsider who's looking in, this is what the way to understand it, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
Your mic went off.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't
I'll get through these last few things, I think, pretty quick, because I think that's a good baseline, because I know a lot of people in the chat were also saying they needed to catch up on
what
we're talking about.
What's your schedule like Father Swayden, in terms of sticking around here? Uh, because I
Uh,
because you're welcome to leave at any point. By the way,
okay, yeah. I mean, I'll put it. I think a good baseline probably we could probably I'd say like 10:30. So let's well for me like 20 more minutes. Like make it the 3 hour mark basically, and we're
yeah,
good. So
yeah,
let's
and
see
you're
how we can
welcome to.
organize.
Yeah, and you're welcome to stay. And also call in anytime, and also if you ever want to use this show to present any information to the general public, go ahead and use this show as a platform. This is as much your show as it is mine. I just want you to remember that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, bless you. We got 42 people here. It's not much, but many hundreds of more people will see this. So,
Yeah,
over time, because I do have a base audience. And usually these videos get like 1,000 views or so.
awesome.
Yeah. So hundreds of people will watch this video over time. So yeah, bless you for being here, and yeah, thank you so much for contributing to the show. But yeah, I'll go ahead and drop the general link in the chat if anybody wants to come up. We got a little bit of time. You guys come up and.
Yeah, and thank you for giving me so much time, both of you, and especially Father. I think most of this will be pretty quick, but I wanted to briefly get your idea on this because I understand what you were saying earlier about salvation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of skipping out of order from where I wanted to go, but I wanted to jump into this first. I think it's probably the most important. Do you think that salvation? So, like for example, we'll just use Machine Lives because he's here and he's Muslim, right?
Okay.
Do you think that there is a pathway for people outside of the church to salvation, although they're not Christian? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I do. I do.
That's a hard way to. That's
you're asking in the most direct possible way, and I will say I don't know because I'm not God, but the only way that we have been shown is the church and through Christ. And sorry.
No, that makes sense.
Machine Lies. But you're always welcome to join us. So,
no, that's a perfect way to answer because that's better than I think a lot of Christians give, which is much more arrogant. Which is no, there is no other way. Which is a simple no. There is no other way other than Jesus. Because I think the truth is Christians we can't know that, right? And I think that's it's not. I know that Christians may not want to focus on that, but I do think that it's important that some things we know and some things we can't know, right?
I'll put it this way. Our Lord says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He says, I am the door. If this is what he says, we have to believe it. But until we actually accept that in our hearts, we can't see how that helps others. Once we can, and we do accept that, then we can invite people. We have a mission to invite people. We have a reason. So I think it's it's good. I think it's a lack of conviction when people don't say that.
Yes, I agree. And so let me get through some of this really quick. So there's a pathway to salvation. We know the at least the best and most direct route from a Christian point of view. And then I know we got into sin. What generally sin is something that we can't ever extricate ourselves away from, right? Like we're going to be sinning. We can only try to minimize as much as possible. Well, how do we define what sin is kind of my main question.
Well, sin literally means missing the mark. It's where we fail. It's where we fall. That's why repentance is a turning away. Because when we fall into almost like falling into mud. And when we turn away from it, we pick up, we clean off, and we continue. And that's the process of repentance. Now, keep in mind that Christ does say, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." So the ultimate goal is perfection. The fact that very few people make it is just being human. But the whole point is that can it be accomplished on earth through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit? Yes, it is possible to be perfect. The overwhelming majority of people on earth, or in the church, are not perfect. And the few that make it, we usually glorify as saints. But I would say if somebody does come under the illusion that they think they're perfect, they're probably lying to themselves or to others.
See, this is why, like, when I first started hearing Orthodox theology, I was like, I've always been an Orthodox Christian because that's what I've always believed since I was a kid. But I obviously wasn't born in the church. So it was very interesting.
It's calling you home.
Yes. So here's my next point. Can you briefly tell me why you think the essence energy distinction is so crucial to understanding Christian theology and metaphysics, generally speaking?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a big one. And so what I will say is this. I will say that the essence energy distinction helps us understand something of the nature of God. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to use this terrible analogy that I have used over the years, and people are always like, that's a terrible analogy. And I think it's okay. When people talk about the essence and the energies of God, picture owning a fish tank, okay? If you stick your hand in the fish tank, you have not fundamentally changed. However, you have changed the fish's world substantially. And the fish cannot see all of you. The fish can only see that part of you that is interacting with it. That simple distinction allows us to understand things like the Eucharist. It allows us to understand things like salvation. These were things that actually were heretical groups like the Docetists, etc., who started coming up with explanations that had no real necessity. So the essence energy distinction, without it, a whole lot of Christianity stops making sense. And this is why when I see Roman Catholics talk about the essence energy distinction as something you shouldn't care about, I ask them, where's your Eucharist then? Because that's literally God on the altar interacting with the human person. According to a world without essence and energy, that's impossible.
Right. No, and I appreciate that a lot, because I think that is a very underserved point that I see where people don't understand. I think without that, you don't really get Christianity, or even reality doesn't make sense in some ways. And I would like to see a attempt to refute it, but I think that is a very important point that I think people don't fully comprehend. And I heard someone say recently, I'm not going to name who it was, but he said something along the lines of, we should only support people who do good things up to a certain point, because, Christians, like, you'll know something's good if they're claiming Jesus and God and all this as the reason behind everything. But obviously we see there are many Christians who do that, but we can see by the fruit of what they're doing that perhaps they're not honest when they say those things, right? So what I'm trying to get at is, do you think that that we should have a special scrutiny for other people who claim to be Christians, who guide us to get involved in political action, or just generally, like I was going out with the imperialism and war and all this? Like, do you think that we should have a level of skepticism that just because someone's in a position of authority outside of the church or inside of the church, but particularly outside of the church, like in the government or something, do you think it is our duty as Christians to kind of have a special level of scrutiny if someone's, proclaiming to be a Christian and giving us prescriptions?
I wouldn't say special. I would just say, like normal.
Well, I would say that.
But I want to say hi to Hank. I want to say hi to Joe. I want to say hi to Neuro. And I want to say hi to Cecil. That's all. You guys go ahead.
Okay. I would say this, and again, we have to look in the scriptures. It talks about God not being a respecter of persons. We have to remember that no matter what level of authority a person is at, even if they are a king that was blessed by the church, etc., they're still just a man. So to that end, I would say that political questions are not often talked about in church. I would be very suspicious of a movement that demands my loyalty as a Christian and is not, the church has no knowledge of it. It's just popped out of nowhere. So I would say when people say it's the Christian thing to do, and if you can't verify that, then there's no reason you have to trust that it is. And you should use healthy skepticism with it.
Yeah, thank you for. I really appreciate that, and I could take that much further, but in the interest of time, I'm going to let that go. Do you have any thoughts on the terms Prometheism, Luciferianism? Do you think that what level of threat do you think that is to what we're seeing happen in the world now, as far as influence on people, generally speaking?
It would have to do on the how much is that being projected, I would imagine, and who is receptive to that projection of being told what to do.
I would, depending on how we define things like Luciferianism, especially if we put transhumanism in that box, then yeah, I'd say that a lot of it is being pushed and a lot of it's being accepted. But I think as it continues to reveal itself as for what it really is, more and more people are becoming horrified by it, and we have to push back. That's my view.
And do you think, generally speaking, that although most of the world isn't Christian in general, that we should still try to point out the dangers of that in a non-religious way as well as a religious way, to try and get people to kind of see the trick that is being played on them, in that, specifically on the transhumanism thing?
Well, I don't think I've fundamentally diverged from being a religious speaker this entire conversation. So from my perspective, I would just talk like I am, which I think is honest. It's important to remember that the church is always a little flock. The church has historically never been the majority of the world. So the point is, it's been the majority of the known world, but not the world. And so the point is that having the knowledge that we do now, no, we just have to pick up and fight. It's like I said, in the 6th century, Nestorians thought that their church was the largest church throughout the world, and they were mostly right. And they based on numbers, they thought that was the truth. I myself am a true Orthodox Christian, an old calendarist, as they call it. So from my perspective, no, numbers are irrelevant. Truth is what's relevant, and that's what we have to hold to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have more to ask, but in general, do you think that occultism is being set on the world in a conscious manner by actors, or do you think that it's just more people being deceived by very few people and very real demons and stuff like that?
Why can't it be both? The simple reality is, this is the goal that the demons have, and this is the goal evil people have. That's called working in league.
Nero, are you looping on this professional man that tries to...
Hey, I actually want to ask my question before we go down Tommy's route, please.
Yeah, please.
Whoa. What do you mean Tommy's route?
Okay, Daddy Joe.
Hank was here first.
Yes, Daddy Joe. My question is, pretty much, I'm not convinced Jesus did save the whole world, because the world is still technically in a fallen state. So my question is, why is the world still in a fallen state if Jesus did save the whole world already?
Well, he died for the sins of the world. That doesn't mean that everyone's saved. The whole point is that if Christ died for our sins, for us, it should be incumbent to want to unite to him. But that doesn't mean that everyone will. A lot of people will pay no attention. They'll say nothing. They'll say it's who cares, or Jesus isn't real, or I like comic books, or they won't care enough. They should, because when we talk about our soul and we're talking about eternal life, it is important to remember that the average human being, depending on your country, lives between 60 to 80 years. The average length of time the church has existed as the New Testament church has been 2,000 years. The average age of creation has been, according to the traditional Julian reckoning, 7,532 years. We'll say 10,000 years. Eternity is everything. And your future, when you compare it to the average human lifespan compared to eternity, is way longer. It's not worth it to not consider it.
Yes, exactly. I agree with you. But if an allegedly omniscient and omnipotent God can't save literally everyone with no effort, then I don't understand what the heck he's doing. He's just
butterflies.
wasting
Hank,
effort.
what do you do with a butterfly when you love it?
I don't. I'm aromantic. I don't say I'm love. So
Okay, the old saying is you let it go, and if it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it was never meant to be. God loves us. He gave us free will, and he would really like it if you showed up on your own.
I'm in his universe. The ball's in his court.
Right, he
Okay,
gave
so
you free will, and you can't blame him for just staying conveniently unaware and saying, oh, you're omnipotent. You should have just handled me the way you wanted. He wants you to have free will and do the right thing. You can't put your kid in a rubber room all his life and then just before he dies go, hey, look, you were a perfect human because we kept you here and you never did anything wrong.
Well, he always knew what I was going to do, assuming I'm omniscient.
Don't admit to it. It was an analogy. Don't admit to it. Thank God.
Well, I did.
Now the FBI is going to come back to your house, and this time they're not going to get turned away at the door. They're going to want to see the secret room.
Come and see the room. I have it ready for you, and I have coffee.
Oh no, I'm not a sucker like that. I'm never going to walk up and see your secret room. You push too hard. But Neurojack's question about the Luciferianism, I mean, just the term Luciferian should infer that is rival to Christianity.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was just saying mechanistically, what do you think the way that it's being done, I guess, is really what I was trying to drive at. Is like, what is the mechanism?
You're living it. Movies, media, all your wants and desires you should be ignoring of the flesh. But I know it's hard. Why? I say I'm celibate, but I don't always achieve that human retention.
But see, that's one thing is like Orthodox Christians don't necessarily see sex as a bad thing, right? Like we don't see sex as like inherently evil.
It's a product of the fall, ultimately.
Really? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, that's it.
Well, I mean, the whole point is, but we don't get freaked out about it. But the simple reality is, I mean, we know that people enjoy it. I mean, there's no like, I have seen on some of these trad Twitter accounts where people are like, if you enjoy relations, well, that's stupid. The reason young people get married is because that's what they're looking for. Don't lie to yourself. But yeah, no, obviously the church, the basic rules are just don't be perverse, not during the fast periods, and, no contraceptions or interrupting what God wants.
And that's why the church of all, but that's why the church of all denominations has always promoted sex after marriage, because if you're not using contraception and you do end up with a kid, well, the mother and father will at least be ringed up for the positives that a married couple can have on the kid that they have.
Well, I could even take it as far as to say that I would say that we now know scientifically that children do better with both parents. So right. You can make the argument from science at this point.
Yes.
With the powers that shouldn't be.
But science also says they do better for an extended family too. And we're promoting a nuclear family.
I'm really good. I'm for extended families. That's the tradition.
Right. Yes. And that goes along with it takes a village to raise a child, as that's more people with a good intention of the kid's outcome contributing. So,
right, but that village should be related to the kid, not just a random smush of people together like in the
village
world of the West.
It's why we say a village to raise a child and not a metropolitan city, because there is a population where people go from being supportive to their neighbors to, I don't know that guy, F him. So I think when we say village, it's like that.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
Small town internet. Because
village.
I had a lot of friends and neighbors when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s that would keep me straight. And in our town, you could keep a kid that's not your kid straight when they're far enough out of line. Now, these days, people would hesitate because it's like, am I going to get arrested for trying to break up these kids fighting in the field or what? But Neurojack, shame. You need to be progressing, sir. You need to be learning these things. The system is against you. It's out to get you, and you need to lose properly when your
I'm glad that
belief system is. not keep you in the buy and sell economy.
I'm actually glad you bring that up, because that actually drives my overarching point of all those questions that I asked, which is, how do you think that we should act as Christians outside of what makes us a good Christian? And
that's how you should act.
Not outside of it, but how?
If you're acting how to be a good Christian, just keep doing that.
Yes, but here's what I'm getting at. Like, when we see corruption going on the government level about gender issues and all these things going on, what level of involvement do you think that we should kind of generally think that we should take in our surroundings, like
your kids?
Well, above and beyond our own family, because the environment still has influence on people. Even if you try to, you can't really shield people from society totally, right?
What do you want?
What do we define society as also? I mean, ultimately, when you're talking about stuff like this, you're talking about an anti-society that they're trying to create. The best way I've seen it described is you should try to, and this is, again, not church advice, but in terms of just survival advice, you should try to see what you can about moving forward in local power. If there are local elections, work towards that, etc. But past that, you can't do much beyond your own community, and you want to make sure to preserve the bonds of that community and keep it together. Sometimes that's done through church and done through family, etc. But past that, there isn't much you can do. You can't save Washington, D.C. unless you live in Washington, D.C. You can't. There's not much you can do outside of that, so you don't, because it's probably not going to bother you anyway. And if they try to force it on you, then you have to, fight to protect it.
And that's what I'm saying. We as Christians should be personable and loving to the trans community. We should not allow them to overreach into our family units and try to sway our offspring if that's where they're reaching into. Like, the thing about the transhumanism is you can't fake being a minority, like, of melanin skin. You can't fake that. But any creeper can throw on a dress and say, "This is who I am. Let me."
Rachel Dolezal as my counterexample, Tommy.
What?
Rachel Dolezal is my counterexample. You can.
Rachel Dolezal, yeah.
Yes.
The transracial. Okay,
yes.
Here's the problem, and this is why I say the whole being loving towards the trans community. Ultimately, we're talking about telling the truth. That is the most loving thing you can do. And if you're dealing with mentally ill people, telling them that and trying to get them help is the most loving thing to do.
Now,
the least loving thing to do would be to affirm them.
Was Rachel actually saying "I am black," or did she roll with people's mistakes?
No, she thought she was black.
Okay, because that's the thing I'm running into, where I had a good bit going when people thought I was killed by police after my battery died from streaming a police raid one night. And I didn't fake my death, as Cynthia and some people are saying. I woke up the next morning and saw my death speculated, and I just let them go with it for a while. So I always thought maybe she had just gotten mistaken for black.
No, it's more like that. You're more like that shop teacher guy who started wearing the prosthetics, and yeah.
But he was trolling, I think.
Yeah, he was trolling.
Okay, yeah. Because I think Steven Crowder is still taking him as serious, and I don't think he caught the part where the guy came out that, I was messing with the whole
Steven Crowder, anyone who could be that as cruel as he was to his pregnant wife, I have no respect for.
Yeah, that was horrible. Especially on the 2-car thing. I'm like, dude.
some guy in the corner is putting up there's some Nazi stuff there. But actually, it's hour 3, guys. I really have to go. Thank you all for having me. You have a great rest of your night. The machine lies, and everyone here, thanks again.
And thank you for coming back after you had a Poland slave experience here.
So have a great night.
Thank you. I'm Father Swayden, and we'll have you back on at some point. Maybe talk about technology and other things. But bless you so much for being here with us, and I will pray for you and send you a note soon. Thank you so much.